Chapter 783. As soon as this thought flashed through Ao Wushuang's mind, she was shocked by herself. Who was the mystical silver fox? The cultivators of the younger generation in the modern cultivation world might not know much about this famous devil, but the cultivators of the older generation, especially those in the Fox Zen school like Ao Wushuang, knew it all too well. This was a figure who had single-handedly set off the 10-year war between the north and the south of the Chinese Taoism. This was a hero who had single-handedly caused the collapse of the late Tang dynasty and the division of China into 5 generations and 10 countries. This was a strong man who had provoked the anger and fear of the cultivators of the Chinese Buddhism and Taoism. This was a strong man who could still escape after a group attack. This was a monster who had only escaped to Japan with 1 soul and 2 souls, and could still beat the strongest demon in Japan, Yamata no Orochi. This was the mystical silver fox who had been severely injured but could still fight against the entire Japanese cultivation world and 80,000 elite soldiers with her human body. This kind of unparalleled expert, this kind of legendary figure, he actually wanted to kill her. Even though Ao Wushuang was extremely bold, she couldn't help but be frightened by this thought at this time. She subconsciously looked around as if just thinking about this thought would arouse the killing intent of the mystical silver fox. Ao Wushuang looked around in horror, but there were tourists and bright lights all around. Such a noisy scene calmed Ao Wushuang down slowly, as if hiding in the crowd would bring her great safety. After she calmed down, she thought of Wang Yuanshan and herself, and great courage suddenly surged in her heart. Ao Wushuang knew that if she wanted to attack the mystical silver fox, the best way was to publicize the current whereabouts of the mystical silver fox. Naturally, someone would come to find trouble with her. But there were 2 things wrong with doing this. One was that the mystical silver fox was likely to break through the encirclement and hide again. If she hid this time, she would be completely hidden in the darkness, and no one would be able to find her. When she appeared again, the world would be shocked and a calamity would come in an instant. As the saying goes, one can only be a thief for 1,000 days. How can one guard against thieves for 1,000 days? If everyone waited for the mystical silver fox to appear all day long, they would not cultivate and would be ready for battle all day long. The second point was that once the news got out, Lu Yi would definitely know that it was related to him. At that time, with Lu Ye's character, he would definitely go all out and immediately find trouble with Su Chan and Li Jiandong. With his strength, it would not be a problem for him to defeat Li Jiandong. Even if Li Jiandong could escape, the people around him would not be able to escape. Now Lu Yi didn't do anything to Li Yundong, because he still hoped that Li Yundong and the Chinese cultivation world would fight to the death. But if he let out the news and pointed his head at the mystical silver fox, Lu Yi would definitely go crazy and fight to the death. Although Li Yundong was strong now, there was still a gap between him and Lu Yi, the 8-tailed earth fox in the Thunder Retribution realm. Especially once the mystical silver fox recovered all its strength would be even more terrible. What Li Jiandong needed now was time. The heavenly thunder was coming. Once he could get through the thunder tribulation, his strength would improve by leaps and bounds again. Therefore Ao Wushuang knew that if she wanted to kill the mystical silver fox, she could only do it secretly. She could not let anyone else know, not even Su Chan. Understanding this, Ao Wushuang slowly moved her feet and walked out of the crowd. She slowly left the bustling street and hid her figure in the thick darkness. Just as Ao Wushuang decided to do something earth-shattering, Li Jiandong and the others did not notice that a terrible turmoil was about to sweep through. Not only them, but also the ordinary people living in the bustling city like them were preparing to celebrate the Spring Festival without noticing it. Now that the Spring Festival was approaching, even the schools that were open later had already started their winter vacation. Many students packed up and returned to their hometowns. Tiannan University had become extremely deserted for a while. Most of the students who rented houses near the school had also checked out. The landlord's business had plummeted and entered the off-season. Early the next morning, the landlord, Mrs. He, got up early and went to her rented house to collect the rent, as if she was afraid that if she was late, the students would run away with her appliances, furniture, and rent. Mrs. He twisted her plump body and climbed up the stairs with difficulty. Step by step, she climbed up the stairs. The family she went to today had left a deep impression on her. Even with her eyes closed, she could feel the door. The reason was very simple. Because there used to be a couple who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth living in this family. Not only had they broken their home appliances and chandeliers, but they had also almost blown up the house. Thinking of that coquettish little fox spirit, Mrs. He was a little angry, especially when she thought of the young man who had humiliated her in front of everyone. She sneered again and again. How could a guy like him open a tea house? How could he shamelessly say that he could do business all over the world? A toad yawning, how arrogant. His arrogance was boundless. As Mrs. He climbed the stairs laboriously, she thought about some unpleasant things. In her life, the happiest time was when she was collecting rent, because she could happily enjoy the various fawning smiles of the tenants, as well as the faces of them pleading for her. The value and meaning of her life was reflected to the greatest extent at this moment. But when Mrs. He finally climbed to the door, she quickly lost her happiness. She found that no matter how hard she knocked, no one answered the door. She opened the door and took a look, only to find that there was no one in the room. Although the clothes and furniture were still there, she had come all the way to collect rent, but the other party was not at home. This really made her unhappy. If she had known earlier, she would have called in advance. Although Mrs. He grumbled in her heart, she knew that even if there was a next time, she still wouldn't call. She liked to launch surprise attacks, and that was the only way she could perfectly appreciate the different reactions on the faces of the tenants, just like when she had suddenly attacked Li Yundong. Mrs. He was about to leave with a sullen look on her face when she suddenly heard footsteps coming down from upstairs. She looked up and saw that it was the tenant's classmate, who was also a student of Tiannan University. Although Tiannan University had already started its winter vacation and many students had already left the campus, there were still some students who lived far away and didn't want to spend money to go back. So they stayed to work part-time and study, and a few of them gathered together to share a room. Mrs. He, the landlady, didn't like such students very much. More people meant more damage to the furniture in her room, and the room would become dirtier. She looked up and saw 3 girls coming down the stairs. Although they weren't very beautiful, they were young and lively. Although they were all wearing sweaters and jeans which made their bodies look a little bloated, they still exuded a vitality that made her jealous. Mrs. He's physique was exquisite and her looks were not ordinary. Coupled with her special identity, the 3 girls who came downstairs recognized her at a glance and greeted her one after another. The landlady smiled hypocritically. "Do you know where your classmates went?" she asked suddenly. One of the girls in the lead glanced at the room she was pointing at and laughed. "They went to work early in the morning." The landlady looked enlightened. "Oh, working? They found a job? Not bad. It's not easy to find a job these days." But in her heart she muttered, "Didn't they just run away? Found a job? Looks like the rent should be higher. But did they find a job so quickly? Did they go to the brothel? Nowadays there are a lot of female college students in the brothel. I don't want my house to become a chicken coop." She quickly smiled and asked, "What kind of job did they find?" But in her heart, she was planning to drive them away as soon as the landlady said something suspicious. But soon the girl smiled and said, "They're waitresses in a tea house." The landlady sneered in her heart. "TSK college students are so worthless now. They can only be waitresses." But she smiled and said, "That's not bad. How's the income? Where's the tea house?" Although Tiannan City was a southern city, it couldn't be compared to places like Guangdong and Fujian, where people liked to drink kung fu tea. Tea houses were everywhere in these 2 places. The local people liked to go to tea houses in the afternoon or at night, drink a bag of kung fu tea and chat with their friends about everything. Some people who were passionate about this kind of thing could drink 5 figures of tea a day. The atmosphere of the tea culture in Tiannan City was thin. In such a big city, the number of tea houses could be counted on 2 hands. Although the rarer something was, the more precious it was. If a business was too withering, it would also reflect the cultural phenomenon behind the business. Therefore, in the landlady's impression, tea houses were a bad business. That was why she had dared to make such a big guarantee to Li Yundong. At this time, as soon as she heard that these tenants were waitresses in tea houses, the landlady suddenly looked down on them. But although she was disdainful in her heart, she still smiled. In business, harmony was the most important thing. She still had this little bit of subtlety. The landlady asked with a smile, "Where are they working as waitresses? I'll go and support them someday." The girl didn't know that the landlady was so capable of sweet talk. She said with a smile, "Auntie, come with us now." The landlady didn't expect that her casual words would be taken advantage of by the other party. She thought to herself, "I'm not interested in doing such a waste of money with you." She smiled and waved her hand. "I won't go. You young people go." The girl was enthusiastic and still invited them warmly. "Go ahead, Auntie. We're about to go too." As she said this, she took out a card from her pocket and said with a smile, "We have VIPs. Besides, Xiaoyu said that if we go for a drink, it'll be her treat." The landlady sneered in her heart but said with a smile, "She's just a waitress. It's not easy for her to make money. Don't let her spend money." She didn't finish the second half of her sentence. Otherwise, if I can't pay the rent, will you help me? Unexpectedly, the girl covered her mouth and laughed. Enihi, you're wrong. Xiaoyu's monthly salary as a waitress is not low. At least this much. As she said this, she gestured with her fingers and stretched out 5 fingers. 5,000? The landlady's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. If a monthly salary of 5,000 yuan was in a first-tier city like Beijing or Shanghai, it would be nothing. Even in a second-tier city, it would not be surprising. But in a third-tier city like Tianan City, especially when a waitress in a small tea house could get such a sum, it was really enviable. One had to know that the monthly rent from her landlady was only slightly more than 1,000 yuan for a house with electrical appliances. The girl nodded and said with a smile, "This is just a temporary job. I heard that the former waitress of the tea house is going back to prepare for the spring festival, so she found a beautiful girl in our school to be a waitress. Unfortunately, the president of our student union thinks that we are not beautiful enough to be waitresses. Otherwise, we can also make a small fortune." The girl was straightforward enough. She was frank about her appearance and seemed to be open-minded. But Mrs. He was a little confused when she heard this. She muttered to herself, "What kind of lousy tea house dares to give waitresses a monthly salary of 5,000 yuan? How much money did they have to waste like this? What a pity, what a pity." When the girl saw the landlady lowering her head and thinking, she persuaded her again, "Go, Auntie He. This tea house is very famous. Many people want to drink tea but can't. If it weren't for the fact that Xiaoyu is a classmate of the tea house owner and I am her schoolmate, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to benefit from this." The landlady sneered in her heart. She glanced at the VIP card in the girl's hand and saw that the card was well made. The expensive aura was secondary. The most important thing was that there were 3 elegant words written on it, "Desanxian." When the landlady saw these 3 words, she was stunned for a moment, but then her eyes widened in an instant, as if she had seen a ghost in broad daylight. She stammered, "Desanxian? Is it the Desanxian of the pedestrian street?" The girl nodded quickly and said with a surprised face, "Auntie He, you know it too? Ah, the Desanxian is really famous." The landlady's mouth was wide open, and her chin almost hit the ground. She was tongue-tied as she stammered, "Yes, is it the Desanxian that opened not long ago? Is the boss called Li Yundong?" At this time the other 2 girls also laughed and said, "Auntie He, do you know him too? He is the most famous celebrity in our school. He is so powerful. He started a business before he graduated from college. Now the tea house business is very good." The landlady's face suddenly became very interesting, and her mind was in a mess. She didn't hear a word of the girl's words. The only thing that kept ringing in her ears was, "The business is very good." The landlady's face turned blue and then red. She thought to herself, "No way, this little brat has actually turned over a new leaf? Impossible, how could I have misjudged him? It's impossible for his tea house business to be so popular. Could it be that I really have to stab my own eyes?" As soon as this thought flashed through her mind, the landlady immediately thought to herself, "Impossible, absolutely impossible." She gritted her teeth and thought to herself, "No, seeing is believing. I have to go and have a look." Chapter 784. The landlady made up her mind and quickly smiled. "Since you are so enthusiastic, I'll do as you say. I also want to see how good the business of this Desanxian tea house is." She was secretly surprised and doubtful. She still couldn't believe that the business of Desanxian would be that good. In her opinion, maybe these 3 students who had never seen the world were just making a fuss when they saw a few customers drinking tea in a tea house. The landlady didn't believe from the bottom of her heart that the business of Desanxian would be prosperous. In other words, she didn't want to believe that Li Yundong could make a comeback. But she had forgotten an old saying, "It is better to be a white-headed old man than to bully a poor young man." Because of their youth, every young person had infinite possibilities. Sometimes, if they were given an opportunity, they could soar to the sky. However, when many adults saw young people who were much younger than them, they often had an inexplicable sense of superiority and condescension. In their eyes, young people were ignorant and reckless. Sooner or later, they would understand the cruelty and coldness of the world and then compromise with the real world, just like what they had experienced. When the landlady faced Li Yundong, she had more or less such a feeling, and the rental relationship between them had nurtured this dark mentality. Especially when the 2 sides had a fierce conflict, the landlady wanted to see the young man fall into the mud forever and be ridiculed by herself forever. Humph. It must be like this. It's just a few little girls who haven't seen the world talking nonsense. The landlady gritted her teeth in her heart. In order to prove this point, the landlady turned around and went downstairs, ready to go with the three little girls to see what was going on. In order to keep up appearances and show off, the landlady specially drove her newly bought Dior A6. She had gritted her teeth and spent a lot of money to buy this car. The four-circle A6 had a nickname, which was the mistress car, because many rich people and dignitaries were keen on sending this kind of generous and expensive car to please their mistresses. The landlady gritted her teeth and bought this kind of car for no other reason than to prove that women could drive this kind of car without relying on their beauty. Unfortunately, she was too fussy. This kind of showing off her wealth and inexplicable comparison mentality seemed to be no better than that of those mistresses. But a good car was a good car after all. As soon as they drove out, the A6's elegant appearance, elegant black body, and streamlined shape made the three little girls exclaim loudly for a while. The landlady found a lot of satisfaction in the envy in their eyes. In theory, the pedestrian street was a place that could not be entered by car, but the rules in China had always varied from person to person. When Li Yundong's Desangxian opened, limousines from inside to outside almost filled the street. Of course, the landlady, who did not like to watch local news, did not know all this. Moreover, she was not a dignitary who could change the rules, so she had to obediently park the car in the underground parking lot, and the four of them slowly walked toward the Desangxian. The landlady had always wanted to rent a shop on the pedestrian street and do some business, but the shops here were not cheap, and she lacked connections with the industrial and commercial bureau. Therefore, she could only keep this idea in her mind and could not put it into practice. But what she couldn't do was actually done by Li Yundong. How could she not be envious and jealous? Along the way, the landlady did not know how many times she had guessed the failure of the Desangxian, but when she suddenly came not far from the door of the Desangxian, she was shocked. Before she got close, she saw a group of people blocking the door of the Desangxian. The landlady could not squeeze in, so she had to stand on tiptoe to take a look. The last time she saw the Desangxian, the tea house had not yet opened, and it had not even been renovated. At that time, it was just a deserted shop waiting to be rented. But now, the Desangxian was already a two-story tea house with a strong classical style. The tea house was yellow in color and it was grand and grand. The corners of the house were flying eaves and arches and it was antique. There was a black plaque with gold characters on the door, and three big words were written with immortal chi, Desangxian. Not to mention the business of the tea house, just by looking at its appearance, one could tell that it was of a high grade. The landlady was stunned and then looked down. She saw two girls standing at the door in classic black cheongsams with gold threads. These two girls were extremely beautiful. Their skin was snow-white and delicate, and their eyes were especially bright and kind. When they saw the guest, they smiled before they said anything. The corners of their eyes were curved into charming arcs, which made people feel good at first sight and couldn't help but want to go in and sit down. The landlady, who hated beautiful women the most, was stunned when she saw them. She couldn't come to her senses. The male tourists passing by on the street almost couldn't walk when they saw them. Many people couldn't afford to drink tea, so they simply took out their mobile phones and cameras to take photos for fun. Therefore, a large group of people crowded at the door of the Desangxian, which was a bit impenetrable. The landlady snorted in her heart and thought, "Are you running a tea house or a brothel?" Of course, she could only think about it in her heart and would not say it out easily. After the landlady glanced out of the crowd, her eyes quickly fell on a tea house of Zhao's tea house opposite the Desangxian. She saw that the tea house was also two-story, but its style was very different. It was full of modern and fashionable style. Through the gap of the curtain covering the upstairs window, she could see that the sofa was made of high-quality fur. Obviously, it had also spent a lot of money to build this tea house. But this tea house was now completely closed for business. Even the plaque was covered with dust, and the corners were densely covered with cobwebs. Compared with the Desangxian, which was as crowded as a market, this tea house was so desolate that it could be described as a sparrow at the door. The landlady was a little surprised in her heart. It seemed that she didn't understand why the Desangxian could force such a fashionable and noble tea house into such a situation. The three girls who came with the landlady obviously didn't expect that the business of the Desangxian would be so good. They looked at each other and soon shouted. They hugged the landlady and squeezed inside at the same time. Women were born to be good at this kind of movement. After they squeezed in with great difficulty, they found that the door of the Desangxian tea house was closed. They could vaguely see that it was full of friends through the gap of the hollowed window. "Why is it closed? You don't want to do business anymore?" The girl in the lead was a little surprised, and her female companion was also a little disappointed. The girl was a little unwilling. She squeezed to the door and asked, but was told by the soft voice of Little Fox, who was acting as a waiter at the door, that she had to get a number first and wait for them before she could go in. This was also the rule that Feng Na and Cheng Cheng had set after learning from the previous experience. A few days ago, the business had suddenly skyrocketed, and there were more customers waiting in the lobby than there were customers drinking tea. Although they still abided by the rules, when one person said a word, the noise of hundreds of people added up was like that of a market. The originally elegant and quiet tea house suddenly fell like a vegetable market, which made people very dissatisfied. After Feng Na learned from the painful experience, she immediately launched a phone reservation service, a booking service, and the waiting service in the outer hall that most restaurants now used. If a restaurant could have such a phenomenon, it meant that the business of this restaurant was simply too good. Therefore, when she heard that they still needed to get a number, the landlady could hardly believe her ears. She was tongue-tied. It was impossible for her to imagine that the business of a tea house could be as good as that of a Western-style restaurant like Pizza Hut, or even better. The landlady quickly came to her senses, and her heart skipped a beat. She knew that her bet with Li Yundong was not going to end well. She subconsciously wanted to turn around and run away, but her feet seemed to be nailed to the ground and she refused to leave. There seemed to be a trace of unwillingness in the depths of her heart. She wanted to see with her own eyes how good the business of this tea house was. What kind of people with mental problems would come here to drink tea? The three girls had come all the way here, so naturally they refused to leave so easily. After getting their number, they sat down on the square stools next to the tea house. The three of them chatted openly and played with their mobile phones under the gaze of the people outside. At this time, the waiter on duty inside also received their text message and came out happily to welcome them. Several female students of Tiannan University were chatting and laughing outside the restaurant. The girl originally wanted to ask her friend to open the back door and lead her in first. Unexpectedly, when the waitress heard this, she shook her head like a rattled drum and whispered, "No, our president is very strict. You don't want me to be fired, do you?" Although Feng Na had retired from the position of president of the student union, she had left a strong mark in the history of the student union of Tiannan University. Therefore, the students in the school were used to calling her president instead of her name. Even now, it was the same when she was in Desanxian. Hearing this, the girl had to give up and stop talking about this matter. Fortunately, they didn't have to wait long before a group of people came out, and they were able to go in. The landlady followed behind them. As soon as she entered the door, her eyes widened. She saw that the tea house was full of people. A rough count showed that there were more than 100 people. However, there was no sound in the tea house. Even if someone spoke, they lowered their voice and chatted in a very low voice. The tea house was strangely quiet. There was only a burst of melodious classical music coming from the tea house, but it was "Fishing Boat Sings at Evening" played by Guzheng. The landlady's expression became a little strange. She couldn't imagine how there was no sound at all when so many people gathered together. She didn't even dare to breathe. The girls were also very curious. In such a quiet environment, it was impossible for them to talk loudly. They all lowered their voices and asked their good friends, the waiters. Although their friends had only been here for 2 or 3 days, they knew a lot of things. After a little explanation, the girls and the landlady suddenly understood that the business of this tea house was brought by the Japanese. At first, most of the people who came were Japanese, and many of them were members of the Yamaguchi-gumi. This group of people was very noisy, but later more Japanese tourists came, and the number of people in China gradually increased, so these gangsters quieted down. In public places, subways, buses, and other places, they were very disciplined. Most of their conversations were very low. Even when they were on the phone, they would subconsciously cover their mouths and phones with their hands. They would also turn their bodies to one side, as if they were afraid that a little louder would disturb others. Although Chinese people were the opposite of the Japanese in this regard, especially when they were on the phone, eating and drinking tea, they never lowered their voices, and even spoke a little louder than usual. However, because most of the customers in the tea house were Japanese at the beginning, some of the Chinese guests who had just come to the tea house to drink tea would, without exception, provoke the angry frowns of the Japanese when they talked and laughed loudly in the tea house. Although Feng Na herself was Chinese, she still wanted to make the tea house an elegant and quiet place, not a noisy place like a vegetable market. Therefore, she deliberately created the environment and atmosphere of Desanxian into an elegant place where people who spoke loudly would be uncultured. With someone taking the lead, there would soon be others following suit. Most people were quiet, and a small number of people would also follow suit. Slowly, it would become a custom and habit. Even a person like the landlady could not help but be affected by such an atmosphere when she entered the tea house. Her footsteps were much lighter. When they sat down, the landlady opened the menu and took a look. Suddenly, she almost spat a mouthful of blood on the tea table. She saw that the lowest consumption on the menu was a string of auspicious numbers. 888. F***CK, the lowest consumption for a cup of tea is 888 yuan. Why don't you just rob a bank? Do you think this is Shanghai or Beijing? Do you think this tea house is on Earth? The most outrageous thing was that the lowest consumption was only the price of the most ordinary cup of tea. At this moment, the landlady suddenly felt that her behavior of collecting high rent from people was simply the accumulation of virtue for 5 generations. Compared with Li Yundong, she was simply a great philanthropist. Evil, really evil. I've lived for a lifetime, but I've never seen such a F***king shop. The landlady was so angry that her teeth itched. She had such a good house with complete appliances, but she only collected more than 1,000 yuan a month in rent. This broken tea house, for a cup of broken tea, actually dared to rob 888 yuan. The owner of this tea house is a heartless bastard, and the people who drink tea are also brainless idiots. In an instant, the landlady's heart was extremely unbalanced. She cursed in her heart, but unfortunately this time she could not hold back. As she cursed in her heart, she also cursed out loud. The girls sitting opposite her heard this and looked at each other. They wanted to persuade her, but they did not know what to say. After all, you're here to drink free tea. You can't drink tea and curse, right? But the girls were too embarrassed to speak, and the Japanese beside them heard the landlady's curses. They turned their heads one after another. What was even more unfortunate was that this group of Japanese were all Yamaguchi people, and there was an interpreter sitting among them. Under the unfriendly gazes, the interpreter's forehead was full of sweat as he translated the landlady's words. When the group of Japanese heard this, they immediately became furious. What? How dare you scold the reincarnated Wisdom King's tea house? How dare you scold us for being brainless? The Yamaguchi people were unhappy. They immediately took off their clothes, revealing their sturdy tattoos. They scolded loudly, F***king dear. Then they walked toward the landlady aggressively. Chapter 785. The landlady was obviously shocked by the Yamaguchi gangsters. She could not understand why they would be so agitated by her scolding Li Yundong. Especially when the landlady saw the tattoos on the bodies of the Yamaguchi gangsters, she was so scared that her heart was in turmoil. There were many gangs in Tianan City, especially in the summer. People with tattoos could often be seen wandering on the streets, especially at night when the food stalls were full of these guys. But the tattoos on these guys were very simple. Not to mention the dark colors, most of them only had a few tattoos, and the most tattoos were a dragon with teeth and claws on their backs. It was not a big deal to say that it was a dragon. It might look good when it was first tattooed, but after a few days, it really looked like a loach tattooed on the body. But among the Yamaguchi gangsters in front of her, the one with the least tattoos was a young man on the far left. He had a head of black hair that was split 3 to 7, and a 9-tattooed dragon was tattooed on his chest and back. The dragon's head was on his chest, the dragon's eyes were the 2 points on his chest, the dragon's mouth was the abdomen, the dragon's arms were the 2 dragon's claws, and the dragon's scales on his back were bright green and dazzling red. But between the scales there was a black contrast, which set off the layered and 3-dimensional feeling, giving people a strong visual effect. In the eyes of the landlady, compared to the 9-tattooed dragon in Tianan City, the gangsters in front of her were extremely unprofessional. Just from the point of tattoos, it was like a kindergarten student meeting an expert at the doctoral level. The two were not on the same level at all. Why did most gangsters like tattoos? Especially the better the tattoos, the more awesome they were, and the more awesome they were? The reason was simple: tattoos hurt very, very much. Although there were laser tattoos and anesthetics, very few people in the underworld would use laser tattoos and anesthetics. Was it a joke? If the gangsters found out that they got a tattoo and anesthetics, they would laugh themselves to death. How could they still make a living? However, if one had tattoos all over their chest and back like this man, even a layman like the landlady would know that it would definitely be a very painful thing. It would be so painful that it would make one hover between life and death. Not to mention an ordinary person, even a second-rate person wouldn't dare to do it. If they were so cruel to themselves, what about others? To be able to endure the pain brought about by such a large area of tattoos, he was definitely a monster among monsters. During a PK, just by flashing this tattoo, as long as the opponent knew what was good for them, they would have to think twice. Could they afford to provoke such a ruthless character? However, this 9-tattooed dragon had the fewest tattoos. After all, a dragon was a dragon, a snake-like animal. It was impossible for it to have tattoos all over its chest and back. Their leader had a tattoo of Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva on his chest. This Bodhisattva was one of the 6 Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva, who held the Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva to help the Azura path. He wore a red kasaya with yellow monk robes inside. He held the Vajra pagoda in his left hand and performed the fearless seal with his right. This Bodhisattva had a colorful crown on his head. His face was like powder and there was a flame halo above his head. Behind him was a vast sky surrounded by colorful clouds. There were 7 lotus platforms under his feet, and each lotus platform had a different colored flame. There were so many things tattooed on the front of the body. At first glance, people would think that it was a moving painting of a human body running around. But that was not all. There was a jade-faced Yama tattooed on the back of the boss. This Yama was extremely handsome, but he was stepping on a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. In one hand he held a ferocious-looking head, and in the other hand he held a sword dripping with blood. This handsome face formed a sharp contrast with the horrifying scene. In particular, the colors were mostly red and green, giving people an extremely strong visual impact. When others took a closer look, they found that, except for the area below his neck, there was not an inch of his skin that was the color of flesh. Even Mike in Prison Break, who had tattoos all over his body, would feel ashamed of his inferiority when compared to him. Even a blind man could tell that this person was definitely a gangster. The landlady was so scared that she trembled all over. Even the girls around her were so scared that they wanted to run away. But as soon as they stood up, they saw another group of people standing around them. Each of them was wearing black suits, black trousers, black leather shoes and black sunglasses. The only thing missing was a few big words on their faces: "I am a gangster." As soon as these people stood up, the girls were so scared that they fell back on their butts. Tears welled up in their eyes. They wanted to shout, "I'm just here to watch the soy sauce. I didn't say those words just now. Don't come at us." The landlady looked at these tattooed people standing in front of her and shouting at her. She felt aggrieved and confused. Although she was afraid, she still struggled to argue loudly, but her voice was slightly trembling. She said, "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the owner, Li Yundong. What are you doing?" After the tattooed man heard the translation, he became even angrier. He slapped the table with a bang, and his eyes almost stared at the landlady's face. He cursed her with filthy words, but fortunately the landlady couldn't understand him. She was just scared and trembled. The translator who followed them was obviously a good civilian. As he wiped his sweat, he carefully said in stiff Mandarin, "He said that the Li Yundong you scolded is the Buddha they believe in." As he said this, he pointed to a statue in a shrine in the Desangxian Hall and said, "That's the one. It's the immovable wisdom king." When the landlady heard this, she thought, "What? This little kid who almost blew up my house is actually the Buddha they believe in? Are you kidding me? Do you think I'm an idiot?" Although the landlady was afraid, she couldn't help laughing when she heard the translation's words. Her laughter was terrible and she was in big trouble. Although there were fewer and fewer people in the Yamaguchi group these days, there were still more than 20 people in the tea house at this time. These were all members who had come from Kanto. The Yamaguchi-gumi's power in Kanto was not obvious. It had been suppressed by the other 2 major gangs in Japan, the Sumiyoshi Association and the Inada Association. The 2 sides were fighting fiercely, and it was the place with the most intense gang conflicts in Japan. But even so, these devout believers still rushed to Tianan City to worship the gang boss of the Buddhist world in their hearts, the immovable wisdom king. When these gangsters set off, they had obviously been warned. They knew that they had to keep a low profile in China. Otherwise it would be a diplomatic incident which would be very troublesome. If they caught people, they might not be able to get them back. Therefore these Yamaguchi people were very low-key here. They would not cause trouble if they could, and they would swallow their anger if they could. Even when they squeezed into the Desangxian Hall and were stepped on a few times, they did not make a sound. But there were exceptions to everything. Most people in China were not religious, so they could not understand how terrible the anger in their hearts would be when the God they believed in was insulted. This was like a good-tempered Muslim coming to the ground of a foreign country and preparing to live a peaceful and low-key life. He did not expect to be pointed at his nose and scolded Allah the next day. This Muslim would definitely go back without saying a word and fight desperately. This was the power of faith. Although not all of these Yamaguchi people were devout Buddhists, these Yamaguchi people who had traveled thousands of miles from Kanto to Tianan City to worship the immovable wisdom king were definitely devout believers. If they pointed at their noses and scolded them, they would not necessarily turn hostile. But if they scolded the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King, they would definitely not be polite. The leader's face suddenly flashed with a murderous look, and his eyes were full of murderous intent. The other Yamaguchi people also had fierce looks in their eyes, and they quickly searched around. They had flown over from the distant Kanto, so they were naturally unarmed. At this time, seeing that there was going to be a conflict and they were all experienced fighters, they immediately turned their eyes to all the weapons they could use in the tea house. Tea tables, benches, teapots, broken pieces of teacups that were like sharp blades, and so on. The landlady rocked back and forth in laughter. She did not realize that there was something wrong with her. She only heard the Japanese let out a thunderous roar and cursed. Then, with a grab of his hands, he lifted her body, which weighed more than 200 kilograms, over his head. He rushed a few steps forward and threw her out with a bang. The landlady had never suffered like this before. Her whole body was like a sandbag, and she immediately hit the door of the tea house and fell heavily to the ground. The tourists outside the door were startled, but the two little foxes at the door reacted quickly. The little fox that was close to the landlady leaped up and wrapped its arms around the landlady, who weighed a few hundred kilograms, in one fell swoop and pulled her into its arms. If the landlady hit the ground with the force of the throw, she would be half dead, or at least half dead. If that happened, it would immediately cause a vicious diplomatic incident. Soon, Feng Na and Ching Ching, who had heard the news in the tea house, were also shocked. They did not expect that the two of them would go into the tea house and talk for a while, and then such a thing would happen outside. Feng Na's expression changed and she shouted at the Yamaguchi people, "What happened? Put on your clothes." The leader of Yamaguchi-gumi regretted throwing the landlady out. He immediately lowered his head and let out a sigh. He quickly put on his clothes and led his team members to kneel in front of Feng Na. He prostrated himself and lowered his head. His face was full of remorse and shame as he muttered some gibberish. Feng Na listened to the translation and roughly understood that the Japanese was apologizing to her and saying that he would bear all the consequences and losses. She wasn't very clear about the strange relationship between Li Yundong and the Yamaguchi-gumi, so she had always disliked the Yamaguchi-gumi. But after all, they had come to drink tea politely, so she couldn't drive them out. But welcoming guests was one thing. It was obviously impossible for her to have a good impression of these guys who walked the underworld. Now that such a thing had happened, Feng Na was a little annoyed. However, she still calmly inquired about the cause and effect of the matter. After asking about what had happened, the leader of the Yamaguchi-gumi saw that the beautiful lady boss of the tea house did not look too good. He clenched his teeth and pressed his palm against the ground. Then he casually broke a teacup, picked up the sharpest porcelain blade, and placed it on his little finger. He then spoke loudly. Even without the translation, the people around them understood that this guy wanted to cut off his finger as an apology. Feng Na had never encountered such a thing before. She was so scared that her face turned pale. She subconsciously wanted to wave her hands, but at that moment, the landlady outside had been saved by the little fox at the most critical moment. But she quickly came back to her senses and sat on the ground shouting, "The Japanese are hitting people. The Japanese are going to kill people." The power of this sentence was infinite in the land of China. When the people outside who did not know the truth heard it, they immediately made a ruckus. As soon as Feng Na heard this, her mind immediately exploded with a buzz. Her lips trembled and she said, "Oh no, something big has happened." She turned her head abruptly and quickly said to Ching Ching, who also looked frightened, "Quick, call Li Yundong. Something has happened." Chapter 786. Ching Ching also realized the seriousness of the problem. She immediately dialed Li Yundong's number. Fortunately, ever since Su Chan and Zi Yuan had been in danger in Harrisburg, Li Yundong had chosen to carry his mobile phone with him these days. Although it was still in silent mode, it was still vibrating. Li Yundong quickly answered the phone. After saying this to Li Yundong, Ching Ching hung up the phone and nodded to Feng Na, indicating that Li Yundong would come in a moment. Only then did Feng Na feel relieved. Her heart, which had been hanging in her chest, finally calmed down. At present, de Sanxian was thriving. If the business was ruined because of such a problem, even if Li Yundong didn't blame her, Feng Na wouldn't forgive herself, and she wouldn't have the face to stay any longer. The round-faced beauty saw that the onlookers outside who didn't know the truth were making a ruckus. Her heart tightened and she secretly gritted her teeth. The problem between China and Japan was the most fragile nerve of this nation. Even the smallest thing could quickly lead to a terrible disaster. Feng Na tilted her head and looked at the waiter who served the landlady. She asked with an ugly expression, "Did you serve her?" The implication of this sentence was that she wanted to hold the waiter accountable. This was the suffering of working in the catering industry and the service industry. Sometimes, although the problem was with the guests, when there was a problem, it was the waiter and the lobby manager who came out to apologize together. Wasn't the rich the master? Feng Na originally wanted the waiter to go out with her to apologize, but she didn't expect that the waiter would be so scared that her pretty face turned pale. She thought that Feng Na was going to fire her. She valued this job very much. Where could she find such a lucrative job now? Besides, this was Tianan City. How many jobs in a third-tier city could offer a temporary worker like her, who had not yet graduated from a third-tier university, a job with a monthly salary of more than 5,000 yuan? Unless it was a charity. When the girls who had come before saw that their friends were so scared that tears were welling up in their eyes, they all secretly regretted it. Especially the girl who had taken the initiative to invite the landlady over for tea. She was even more resentful in her heart. "You old woman, it's okay that you don't appreciate the free tea I invited you, but how dare you make such a scene? Aren't you trying to make trouble?" The girl was very loyal. She took the initiative to take all the blame and said, "It's all my fault. I invited her here. She's our landlord. I just wanted to." Before she could finish, Feng Na stretched out her hand and stopped her. Feng Na gently shook her head and said, "Now is not the time to find out who is right and who is wrong. What matters now is how to solve this problem." The leader of the Yamaguchi-gumi had been listening to the translator softly translate the conversation between Feng Na and the others. At this moment, when he heard what she said, he immediately gritted his teeth, yelled, and used a piece of porcelain to cut off his pinky finger. The moment he exerted force, blood immediately gushed out of his finger. The guests and Feng Na were all scared out of their wits. How sharp was the porcelain shard? How painful would it be to use it to cut one's pinky finger? Feng Na felt a headache coming on. She quickly advised, "Stop, stop." However, the leader was also stubborn. He raised his other hand high and was about to slap the porcelain shard, trying to break his finger. Just as his hand was about to fall, he suddenly slapped someone's arm. He was stunned for a moment, thinking that it was one of his subordinates who had stopped him. Anger rose in his heart, and he was just about to turn his head to reprimand them when he saw a handsome young man gently holding his arm. Feng Na and the others were focused on the leader. They didn't notice that there was suddenly an extra person next to them. She shifted her gaze and fixed her eyes on him. Suddenly she was overjoyed. "Li Yundong? You're here." "Li Yundong?" The leader didn't understand Chinese, but he could still understand these three words. He was shocked and quickly looked at Li Yundong carefully. What a joke, this was the reincarnation of Wisdom King. So many members of Yamaguchi-gumi had come to Desanxian before, but none of them had met the true God. Today he had met one. It was a great joy and a great blessing. Originally, this small leader was quite resentful about the matter of his finger being cut off. He had come to China for no reason, but he had lost his finger for no reason. Anyone in his shoes would be unhappy, but now he was ecstatic. He felt that it was too worthwhile to lose his finger. The leader immediately prostrated himself on the ground and began to talk. The members behind him also prostrated themselves on the ground, not daring to raise their heads. It was as if they had really seen the leader of Yamaguchi-gumi. The guests in the tea house had changed from tea guests to onlookers. They all stretched their necks to look at Li Yundong. Some of them more or less knew that the identity of the owner of this tea house was very mysterious and strange. Many Japanese had come here from thousands of miles away just to sacrifice this living person. Such a thing was very rare in remote cities or rural areas of China, let alone in such a modern city. Everyone only felt that it was a new experience. Looking at Li Yundong, who was too young, they sighed and pointed at him in a low voice. Li Yundong had been outside to prepare the New Year's goods with Su Chan and Zi Yuan. He hadn't expected to encounter such a disgusting thing at this time. He was secretly unhappy, but his face was quite calm. After stopping the leader's self-mutilation, he turned his head to look at Feng Na and said, "What on earth is going on? Tell me first." Feng Na was quite eloquent. In just 2 or 3 words she had clearly explained what had happened. After listening, Li Yundong looked outside and immediately laughed out of anger. "Well, if this landlady hadn't come out herself, I would have almost forgotten about her. Well, instead of hiding far away you came here to behave atrociously. You can't even let me have a good New Year's Day. You're really something." Li Yundong sneered in his heart. He nodded to Feng Na and the girl who had come with the landlady, but his face was quite kind as he said, "It's okay. Just come out and make things clear. I don't believe that no one can reason with me." Li Yundong took the lead and walked out. The crowd outside who didn't know the truth, heard the landlady's encouragement. At this time they all shouted loudly as if they wanted to tear down de Sanxian. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He thought to himself, "Brothers and sisters, don't vent your anger. I was still hoping to make a fortune by killing the Japanese. Now that they have been driven away by you, who can I kill?" Yes, there were indeed a lot of people who forgot their ancestors and clung to the Japanese to suck their hemorrhoids. But that was because they were begging the Japanese to invest. Who did I offend? It was the Japanese who cried and begged to give me money. I can't just push the money away, right? Patriotism is not love like this. Thinking of this, Li Yundong's eyes fell on the landlady with extreme hostility. The grudge between the two of them was not very big, but it had been going on for a long time. Everyone in the world had times when they were down and out, and people had the best memory when they were down and out. Whoever had offended them and helped them, it was really unforgettable. Seeing the landlady, Li Yundong remembered the situation when he and Su Chan had been driven out by this guy. He was angry, especially when he thought of the bet he had made with her before. Although he didn't expect this old woman to really stab her own eyes, she couldn't ruin his show like this. Even a clay figurine had a temper. Anger was hidden in Li Yundong's eyes, and his face was gloomy. He stood in front of the crowd without being angry. Although he had not cultivated for a long time, the number of times he had fought with people was more than many cultivators who had cultivated for a lifetime combined. After these life and death battles, he had long possessed an extraordinary momentum. Usually he restrained his chi so ordinary people couldn't feel it. At this time when he released his chi, it was really an invisible pressure that instantly enveloped the whole place. It was as if Buddha had turned his wrist and pressed down a 5 elements mountain, a group of naughty Sun Wukong monkeys under the mountain. At this moment the air became frozen, and the noisy crowd instantly quieted down. The crowd only felt that this overly young boy had an indescribable majesty, which made them not dare to act rashly. The landlady was still making a scene with tears and snot running down her face. When she suddenly heard the silence around her, she subconsciously looked up and immediately recognized the little brat she had looked down upon. He was standing in front of her, looking down at her coldly. Li Yundong's gaze made the landlady feel cold all over, and she unconsciously shivered. She had never seen such a pair of majestic eyes. Logically speaking, such a pair of eyes should only appear on a middle-aged person of high status. This person held great power and controlled the life and death of many people. Slowly he would be able to cultivate such a dignified aura. But how could it appear on a young boy in his 20s? This was impossible. The landlady felt as if her heart was being squeezed by a pair of invisible hands. Not to mention thinking she couldn't even breathe properly. She swallowed the words she had wanted to say. No matter what, she couldn't say them. Li Yundong glanced at her and glanced at her. Then, he turned his head and nodded to the girl behind him, indicating for her to tell him what had happened. The girl was also bold. She explained the general situation of the matter in front of everyone, and only then did everyone understand. Although the people hated Li Yundong, they were not unreasonable people. As soon as the matter was explained clearly, everyone naturally calmed down, especially the leader of the Yamaguchi-gumi. He walked quickly to the front of the crowd, knelt down in front of them and apologized to them. The crowd looked at each other, speechless. As soon as the landlady saw Li Yundong appear, she immediately deterred the crowd with her incomparably powerful aura and made them not dare to make any noise. At this time she even made the final conclusion and quickly settled the matter. She wanted to pester him endlessly, but she knew that she was in the wrong. She felt guilty and didn't dare to say anything no matter what. She sat on the ground, looked at the crowd foolishly, and then looked at Li Yundong foolishly. She wanted to sneak away in the chaos. But Li Yundong had been watching her. How could he let her go so easily? He immediately pressed the landlady's shoulder and said with a smile, "Auntie, long time no see. How have you been recently?" The more affectionate his smile was, the more the landlady trembled in her heart. Even such a gangster could respect the boy in front of her like a god. One bad word and he threw her out. She had treated him like that before. How could Li Yundong take revenge on her? The landlady put herself in his shoes and was so scared that she almost peed and defecated. Her legs went soft and she was about to kneel on the ground, begging for mercy. But Li Yundong reacted quickly. He held her shoulder and said with a smile, "Auntie, it seems that you have been in poor health recently. Come to our tea shop and have some tea." I guarantee that you will be healthy and at ease. As he said this, he raised his head and shouted at the waiter in the shop, "Come on, treat my auntie he well." The landlady wanted to cry but had no tears. She wanted to turn around and run, but her arm was grabbed by Li Yundong. An inexplicable force pulled her, making her unable to move, let alone shout. She could only watch herself walk step by step toward the Desanxian, as if she was going to step into a devil's den and go deep into hell. She turned her head and watched the door of the tea shop behind her close with a bang. The landlady wailed in her heart, "I'm going to die." Chapter 787. The landlady entered the tea house in fear. She saw that the customers in the tea house were all looking at her strangely, like a group of onlookers waiting to be beheaded at the entrance of a vegetable market in Beijing. In particular, there was a group of unkind and covetous Yamaguchi people next to her. No matter how she looked at them, their gazes made her hair stand on end. The landlady wanted to say a few words of mercy, but Li Yundong's jinchi had invaded her body and tightly locked her lungs, making it difficult for her to breathe, let alone speak. Li Yundong smiled at the people in the tea house and said, "It's a misunderstanding. It's okay. Everyone please continue." Only then did everyone withdraw their gazes, but there were still many people who kept glancing at them out of the corner of their eyes. As the owner of the tea house, Li Yundong naturally sat down at the tea table, pointed to the seats, and smiled at the girls who were at a loss and didn't know what to do. "Sit down, what are you waiting for?" Li Yundong was a junior this year and these girls were also his classmates, but they were in the same school but in different departments. Before Li Yundong became famous, they naturally didn't know who this fat otaku was. But after Li Yundong became famous, because his status and reputation had climbed too high and too fast, it was impossible for them to say a few words to him. They could only occasionally meet him at school and look at him from a distance. But now they suddenly saw the most legendary figure of Tiannan University appear in front of them. Although they didn't understand how Li Yundong had appeared, who cared? Most importantly, the elusive legendary emperor was sitting right in front of them and talking to them with a smile. The girls were so excited that their cheeks were red and their eyes were shining. They knew that if they told their sisters what had happened today, they would be envied. Hearing Li Yundong's greeting, the girls all took their seats and looked at Li Yundong excitedly. It seemed that they had countless gossip questions to ask him. Li Yundong seemed to have expected this. He turned his head to look at the landlady ahead of time, not giving them a chance to gossip at all. Li Yundong's face was full of enthusiasm. He smiled at the landlady and said, "Auntie, why didn't you tell me in advance that you were coming today? I could have made some preparations." As he said this, he smiled at Feng Na, who was a little dumbfounded. "Why are you still standing there? Why don't you bring the menu?" As if awakened from a dream, Feng Na turned around to get the menu, but Li Yundong quickly said, "Forget it. Just make a few cups of the best Huangshan Maofeng." The landlady and these girls didn't know much about tea, so they didn't know what the top-grade Huangshan Maofeng tea was. They saw a very beautiful girl who looked a little like a fox step forward and skillfully make tea. The whole process was pleasing to the eye and dazzling. The girls looked at her and sighed, but the landlady was not in the mood to appreciate it. The more she looked at Li Yundong's smile, the more she felt that he was up to no good. Although he was smiling brightly at the moment, he might have some bad ideas in his mind. Humph, a weasel paying a visit to a chicken for the new year. The landlady looked at Li Yundong nervously, and her eyes kept staring at the hands of the tea waitress, for fear that she would do something bad later. The little foxes were also foxes from the Fox Zen school. Although they didn't know much about the world like Su Chan, they had been familiar with their shirshu since they were young. They were good at zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, making tea and tasting wine. Although their tea skills were not as good as Zi Yuan's, they were more than enough to deal with the situation. After Little Fox made the first cup of tea, she was about to pour it away, but Li Yundong held her hand and said with a smile, "Come on, give Auntie he a cup." Little Fox looked at Li Yundong in confusion and blinked. She didn't seem to understand why Li Yundong would give the first cup of water used to wash the tea to someone else. In the art of tea, the tea brewed for the first time was not to be drunk. It was only used to wash the tea leaves, and the tea brewed afterward was to be drunk. Although there were many customers here, not many people knew this rule. Most people just watched the tea waitress perform, and few people cared about why the first cup of tea couldn't be drunk. Li Yundong was obviously taking advantage of the landlady's ignorance of the art of tea. He smiled and persuaded her to drink the tea. Although Little Fox didn't know what Li Yundong was up to, She still obediently held the teacup with both hands and brought it to the landlady. Although the landlady didn't know the rule that the first cup of tea couldn't be drunk, how could she dare to drink it? What a joke. There's no poison in the tea. The landlady's face was full of suspicion. She wanted nothing more than to stick a silver needle out of her eyeballs and test the poison in the tea. Li Yundong sneered inwardly at the sight of the landlady, but he still put on a warm smile on his face. He smiled and picked up a cup of tea. "Auntie, this is a tea house," he said. "I'll replace wine with tea. Here's to you." As he spoke, he tilted his head back and drank the steaming hot tea like he was drinking wine. The landlady noticed that the tea Li Yundong brought out was the same as the tea in front of her, coming from the same teapot. At that moment, the landlady even thought that there was a mechanism in the teapot. Usually it would be non-toxic tea, but when the mechanism was turned, it would be poisonous tea. Obviously, the landlady's imagination had reached a certain level at this moment, reaching the level of a domestic TV series. Her tiny eyes kept sweeping back and forth over the teacup, but she refused to take it. Li Yundong smiled meaningfully and said, "Auntie, why won't you drink it?" His words made the landlady shiver. She subconsciously looked around, only to see that the people at the mountain pass were staring at her with unkind eyes, as if they would teach her a lesson if she didn't drink it. She thought to herself, "I guess Li Yundong won't be so bold as to give me poisonous tea in front of everyone, right?" After thinking about it, the landlady gritted her teeth, grabbed the teacup, raised her head, and drank it in one gulp. The wind was howling, the water was cold, and the strong man who drank the tea would never return. Seeing that she had drunk the tea, the girls next to her also dared to reach out and drink, but Li Yundong stopped them with a smile. "Don't. This first cup of tea is specially for Auntie. If you want to drink it, drink the second cup." The leading girl was also very clever and obedient. She withdrew her hand and said with a smile, "So we followed the landlady today." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing when he heard this. Although the people next to him didn't know what he was laughing about, Li Yundong's aura was too strong. As soon as he laughed, the people around him also laughed. The landlady also felt that it seemed a little inappropriate for her not to laugh. After her cheeks twitched twice, she forced a fake smile. Li Yundong laughed for a while and nodded to Little Fox, asking her to continue making tea. He kept persuading the landlady to drink the tea. The landlady was also very straightforward. She knew that it was impossible for her to walk out of the Desanxian unscathed today. The landlady made up her mind and thought to herself, "Anyway, this tea is ridiculously expensive, so I might as well drink it back." She also let go of her appetite. She drank every cup that Li Yundong gave her. She was not a refined person, so how could she taste the quality of the tea? When the tea guests next to her saw her drink cup after cup like pouring wine, they all secretly bared their teeth and shook their heads. They secretly thought that this woman was chewing on peonies, wasting the lute and boiling the crane, and it was a great spoiler. However, Li Yundong didn't seem to be aware of it. He just accompanied her with a smile. It was not until the last pot of tea had been brewed 7 times that he stopped persuading her. He smiled and took the landlady's arm, pulling her out, and said with a smile, "Auntie, it was a pleasure drinking tea with you today. You must come again when you have time in the future." The landlady was a little confused as she was pulled out by him. When they were out of the door, she was stunned and blurted out, "You just let me go?" Li Yundong also pretended to be surprised and looked at her. "Do you still want to stay here for dinner?" The landlady was choked by him and didn't know how to reply. She looked at Li Yundong strangely. She only felt that although the boy's appearance and figure didn't seem to have changed much from before, the overall feeling of his whole person had changed dramatically. She only felt that Li Yundong was unfathomable. He had kneaded her like a dough, molding her into any shape he wanted. Her emotions and speech were completely controlled by him. At this time, there were still some busybodies who had stayed in front of the tea house and refused to leave. When they saw Li Yundong and the landlady walking out happily together, they all felt relieved and left one after another. It didn't seem that they had any grudges against each other. After the landlady boldly took a few steps out, she looked back nervously, only to see that Li Yundong was still waving at her and smiling. She also forced a smile and subconsciously waved her hand, then turned her head and walked away quickly. She walked faster and faster. When she was out of Li Yundong's sight, she was walking as fast as she could. When she drove all the way back to her home and locked the door, she calmed down. She couldn't believe that Li Yundong had let her go so easily. Could it be that I wronged him? The landlady's expression was a little strange, but not long after this thought flashed through her mind, her stomach suddenly turned upside down. Her face changed and she rushed to the toilet as if her butt was on fire. As soon as she untied her pants, she made a noise like firecrackers. What she didn't know was that the top-grade Huangshan Maofeng tea that Li Yundong had given her was Zi Yuan's precious collection. Because this top-grade immortal tea had been stored for too long, it needed to use the tea that had been brewed for the first time to remove the yin qi in it. When it was brewed for the second time, there would be no yin qi or turbid qi, only immortal qi and clear qi. However, Li Yundong had bad intentions. He made her drink the first cup of tea, and then he made her drink the rest of the tea from beginning to end. The clear qi and turbid qi in her stomach mixed together and attacked each other. Naturally, it would turn the river and the sea upside down. The landlady finally came out of the toilet, but before she could sit down, her stomach rumbled again. She had no choice but to rush back in, complaining incessantly and wailing. In the Desanxian tea house, after the tea house's business was over, the little fox who had been puzzled, returned home and told Su Chan and Zi Yuan about the matter. After thinking about it, Zi Yuan and Su Chan quickly figured out the crux of the matter. Zi Yuan smiled and explained the key to it. Su Chan smiled and put her arm around Li Yundong's and said, well, let's teach this blind guy a lesson. Let her bully us. Li Yundong put on a straight face and pretended to be angry. Nonsense, how could I teach her a lesson? I invited her to tea. This is repaying evil with good. I'm a gentleman. His words made the people next to him laugh. Zi Yuan shook her head and said, you're too wicked. Not only did you mess with her, you even took advantage of her. Li Yundong didn't comment. He put his hands behind his back, raised his head, and suddenly recited a poem by Li Bai. Don't you see, the water of the yellow river comes from the sky and rushes to the sea, never to return? When everyone heard his pretentious recitation, they all remembered that the landlady was going to live in the latrine for a long time in the next few days. The water of the yellow river came from the sky and rushed to the sea, never to return. They couldn't help laughing gloatingly. Chapter 788. Li Yundong had played a trick on the landlady, which made Su Chan vent her anger. However, the little girl still felt that it was a little too easy for this damned woman who had driven them out. If it had been her, she would have been polite if she hadn't hit the landlady in the face with a brick. The landlady cursed Li Yundong while squatting in the toilet for 2 whole days. Finally, she got rid of the stinky toilet. After 2 days, she had lost a lot of weight. It could be considered that she had lost weight. Although she knew that Li Yundong was most likely playing tricks on her, the landlady did not dare to say anything. What a joke. If she caused any more trouble, who knew if the tea she drank next time would really be poisoned? But this was just a small episode. Life was like this. Sometimes it was earth-shattering, and both sides wished they could destroy each other spiritually. But when the matter was over and looking back, they often had a feeling of shaking their heads and laughing, just like a person who had matured and grown up looking at himself when he was still young. Li Yundong was like this. He had learned about the landlady and completely announced that he had said goodbye to his previous youth. He who had cultivated to the Jinshin phase in his 20s, would usher in his glorious years. However, before that, what Li Yundong wanted most was to have a good new year with the people around him. This was the first spring festival he had spent since he had met Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin. Although there was still some time before the spring festival, it was now approaching the 23rd of the 12th lunar month, which was also the day of the Little New Year. Although the cultivation world had declined to the point that it was almost hidden from the world, and contemporary society had paid less and less attention to tradition, the cultivation world still maintained its traditional position under the impact of the torrent of reform and opening up. Zi Yuan was a genuine inner disciple. 5 generations of her ancestors were all cultivators. She was a fairy who had started cultivating in her mother's womb. Whether it was in her mind or in her bones, she was deeply imprinted with the elegance and dignity of traditional Chinese women, meek and gentle, as well as the characteristics of conservative and introverted. The importance that Zi Yuan attached to tradition was deep in her bones. She knew that she might be imprisoned, but in order to abide by the tradition of the Linggong sect succession ceremony, she would rather sacrifice herself and abide by the rules. Similarly, Su Chan was also a girl who attached great importance to tradition. But unlike Zi Yuan's observance of tradition was influenced by her childhood environment. Everyone told her that she had to abide by tradition and rules, so she became a mechanical doll that was fully wound up and walked on a fixed track. Su Chan, on the other hand, had not been exposed to modern things since she was a child. All she had been exposed to was the traditional culture of the cultivation world. She had no other choice, so she had also become a very traditional person. However, the longer she stayed in the secular world, the more Su-chan tended to be a modern person. It was just that she had been deeply influenced since she was a child, and tradition was a strong inertial force for her. In sharp contrast to them, Zhou Qin, the daughter of an official who had already come out of seclusion, had been cultivating diligently day and night after being enlightened by Zhang Zhishuan. Her cultivation realm had improved by leaps and bounds, and she had already broken through to the middle level of the Jinshin. As long as she comprehended the unity of heaven and man infinite void, she would be able to cultivate to the extreme level of the Jinshin and reach the perfect jade body realm like Li Yundong. Zhou Qin was not a very traditional person. She was very rebellious in her bones, but in fact, sometimes rebellion was a different kind of tradition. Especially after she converted to Li Yundong, she became the most devout cultivator. She tried her best to maintain everything in the cultivation world. As for things like tradition, she was even more duty-bound to maintain it. In addition, this was their first spring festival with Li Yundong. Whether it was out of justice or out of personal feelings, they all wanted to have a prosperous and lively spring festival. But according to the traditional rules, the spring festival was celebrated at the beginning of the Little New Year, that is, on the 23rd or 24th of the 12th lunar month. The reason why there was a difference of 2 days was because of the so-called officials 3, people 4, boatmen 5, which meant that the government would offer sacrifices on the 23rd of the 12th lunar month, the ordinary people would offer sacrifices on the 24th, and the boatmen who made a living on the water would offer sacrifices on the 25th. China was a world of agricultural culture, and the people loved the soil. Therefore, people who made a living on the water seemed to be a group of non-mainstream people at that time. Therefore, the saying that the Little New Year would be celebrated on the 25th was not widespread. It was generally celebrated on the 23rd and the 24th. Most of the cultivators in the ancient cultivation world were officials. In the Han Dynasty, the 5 pecks of rice sect was popular in Sichuan and Shu. The local ruler, Zhang Lu, was even the leader of the 5 pecks of rice sect, the grandson of Zhang Daoling, the founder of Taoism. The celestial master Taoism in the Wei, Jin, and northern and southern dynasties, and the Loguan Taoism in the Tang dynasty were all major cultivation sects that had been recognized by the emperor and the government. The leader or head of these sects all had very high official positions. Among them, the founders of the Taoist assembly in the Tang dynasty, Great Jinren Luo Gongyuan Yi Fashion, and others were all high officials and rich salaries. Among them, Yi Fashion was even conferred the title of Honglu Minister and Duke of Yu during the period of Emperor Ruizong of the Tang dynasty. In the Song, Yuan, and Ming dynasties, the cultivation world had entered the heyday of China's 2,000-year feudal history. The leader of Jingyi school was conferred the title of Great Jinren by the emperor of the Song dynasty many times and was given the title of Celestial Master. He had the power to suggest the appointment and dismissal of Taoist affairs management officials and Taoist temple managers in Jiangnan, and to propose to the emperor the funding and staffing of new Taoist temples. He even had the power to directly issue diplomas. This power had only been possessed by the government since ancient times, which also meant that in this period, the cultivation world had officially become a bureaucratic class. In the Yuan dynasty, with the support of Genghis Khan and Kublai, the Chuanzhen sect rose. Qiu Chuji and his disciples even held more power than the leader of Jingyi school in the past. This situation did not fade until the death of Emperor Jiajing of the Ming dynasty and the succession of Emperor Wanli. Therefore, although the cultivation world had almost been forgotten, they still followed the tradition of celebrating the small new year on the 23rd, which was the day when the government celebrated the small new year. There were 2 traditions during the small new year. One was to sweep the new year, and the other was to offer sacrifices to the kitchen god. As the name suggested, sweeping the new year was to clean the whole family before the end of the year. As for offering sacrifices to the kitchen god, it was easier to understand. It was an activity held to worship the kitchen god. The day before the 23rd of the 12th lunar month, Li Yundong transferred the last batch of little foxes who had stayed at Desangxian to guard their posts back. The next day they got up early. From him to Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, Lin Miao, Chao Yi, Lu Yuehong, and the little foxes of the Fox Zen school, they all rolled up their sleeves and got busy at home. Although they were all cultivators with high or low cultivation quotients, it was reasonable to say that cleaning was a very common thing. However, they all did it very seriously without the slightest neglect. The little foxes all rolled up their sleeves, revealing their arms that were like snow lotuses, and carefully wiped the glass and the floor. As the leader of the sect, Li Yundong naturally set an example. He held a broom and didn't use any spiritual power or magic. He lay on the floor and wiped the dust under the bed. Behind him, Su Chan followed like a little tail. She held a dustpan in her hand and pointed behind him with a smile. Here, there's dust. Li Yundong listened to her talking energetically behind him. It was even more lively than what he was doing. He couldn't help but turn around and say with a smile, "Hey, where is the dust? Why can't I see it?" Su Chan pointed to the corner with a smile. "Over there, you can only see it from my angle." Li Yundong smiled and handed the dusty broom to her nose. "Only you can see it? Well, you can sweep it." Su Chan immediately covered her nose with her hand and said with a smile, "It's so dirty. Take it away. It was you who said not to let me sweep it. Why are you regretting it now?" Li Yundong snorted and said, "I didn't ask you to idle around and command me." Su Chan giggled. Just as she was about to speak, she heard a knock on the door behind them. They turned around and saw that Ziyuan was wrapped in a purple silk scarf, which was obviously used to cover up the dust. At her level of cultivation, once her Jinqi was surging, it would really be impossible for a drop of rain to get close to her and a speck of dust to stain her. However, the tradition of sweeping the new year could not be done with Jinqi. Otherwise, in the past, it would have been considered a crime of great disrespect. Ziyuan knocked on the open door with her finger, and with her other hand she gently pulled down the scarf on her head. The black hair on her head also fell down like a waterfall. She shook her head slightly and shook her beautiful hair, as if she wanted to shake off the dust on her head. At this moment, the fairy who used to walk in the clouds seemed to have fallen into the mortal world and become a housewife. Li Yundong and Su Chan looked at each other and smiled. Li Yundong asked with a smile, "What's wrong?" Ziyuan smiled and said, "Everyone is almost done cleaning up and preparing to sacrifice to the kitchen stove. You can only do this alone. We will hide away." Ziyuan was a cautious and prudent person and rarely joked with others. Her words were quite playful. Li Yundong immediately laughed and shook his head like a rattle. He knew that the traditional custom of sacrificing to the kitchen stove in ancient times was that women could not participate. As the saying went, men did not worship the moon, and women did not worship the kitchen stove. Worshipping the moon referred to the 7th day of the 7th month, when the cowherd and the weaver girl met in the Milky Way. It was commonly known as the Daughter's Day. On that night, in ancient times, women would go to the balconies and courtyards, display fruits and pastries, light incense and candles, and pray to the moon until late at night. This was a women's festival. Of course, a man should not participate in it. The fact that women did not worship the kitchen stove showed the strong feudal custom of men were superior to women, and men were superior to women. In the Tang dynasty, Duan Qingshi wrote Yang Zizu Nuogeo Ji, it said that the kitchen god was named Yu and looked like a beautiful woman. It meant that the kitchen god was a handsome man who was as handsome as a beautiful woman. The man was afraid that there would be suspicion of adultery after the woman worshipped the kitchen stove, so there was a saying that women did not worship the kitchen stove. Ziyuan's adherence to tradition seemed to be a little old-fashioned and even pedantic. She followed it regardless of whether it was good or bad, just like what her master Wang Yuanshan had said to her. Whether it was true or false, she would do it. Li Yundong didn't care about this. He shook his head even more and said, "What are you talking about? What era are we in? Women don't worship the kitchen stove? Don't joke around. There are so many people here and I'm the only man. You want me to worship the kitchen stove alone? Isn't this a joke?" Ziyuan pursed her lips and said with a smile, "I don't care. The rules can't be broken. You go to worship the kitchen stove by yourself. We're going out to buy some New Year's goods." Li Yundong was anxious. "Don't. You left me alone at home. Are you all going shopping? That's outrageous, isn't it?" However, Ziyuan shook her head with a smile. Her attitude was very firm. Li Yundong had no choice but to turn his head to look at Su Chan, only to see her giggle. She jumped to Ziyuan's side and said with a smile, "I'm going shopping with Sister Ziyuan." Li Yundong was so angry that he rolled his eyes and said angrily, "I just went out to buy some New Year's goods yesterday, and today you guys are making trouble again. Alright, you can all go out. I'll stay at home alone. Let's see how much money you have to squander." Ziyuan pursed her lips and smiled. She turned around and went out and Su Chan followed her out. After a while the little foxes obviously got the news. They cheered and rushed out of the door one after another. The originally lively house suddenly became deserted. Li Yundong sat down on the edge of the bed gloomily and muttered in his heart, "Should I stay to worship the damn kitchen stove, or should I just go shopping with them? Although it was only the Lunar New Year's Eve, it was too miserable to be left alone at home, wasn't it? Just as Li Yundong was hesitating, he suddenly saw a pretty face poking out of the door. Her eyes were curved into arcs with a smile. Who else could it be but Su Chan? Li Yundong was shocked and then overjoyed. He waved to Su Chan and said, "You didn't go?" Su Chan threw herself into Li Yundong's arms with a burst of fragrance and smiled slyly like a little fox who had done something bad and had succeeded in her trick. "Hee, when they all go out, I can be intimate with my master." As she said this, the little girl looked at Li Yundong with a face full of resentment. "Master, how long has it been since we've been intimate? I want to be intimate with you." Chapter 789. Although Su Chan was a coquettish and beautiful little fox, she rarely took the initiative in matters between men and women. Li Yundong looked at the little girl in his arms with some surprise. He scratched the tip of her nose with his finger and said with a smile, "You little girl, you're a little scheming, aren't you? You coaxed them all out and then you came back. Not bad, not bad." Su Chan only wanted to be with Li Yundong every minute and every second. It would be best if she could not let go of him. But the little girl also knew that her master was a person who wanted to do great things, so she could not be a burden to him. She looked at him and said pitifully, "But I used to be with you every day, but now I often can't see you. Sometimes I can only see you for a few days and then you disappear again after a few words. I feel sad." Li Yundong's words made Su Chan look at Su Chan, and she said pitifully, "But I used to be with you every day, but now I can't see you." No matter how reasonable and broad-minded the little girl was, seeing that there were more and more beautiful women around Li Yundong, although Li Yundong was a gentleman and could still control himself, it was absolutely impossible for her not to have any thoughts in her heart. There was no such stupid woman in the world, and even if there was, it would definitely not be Su Chan. However, after all, many of them were Li Yundong's fellow disciples. Ziyuan was Li Yundong's confidant who was both a teacher and a friend. She also took care of Su Chan a lot. Zhou Qin was Li Yundong's friend, classmate and eldest disciple. Lin Miao was also Li Yundong's disciple. Even Feng Na, Ching Cheng, and the others were also Li Yundong's friends and helpers in his business. These people were all beautiful women. It was true that Li Yundong was fated to have a peach blossom. Sometimes just looking at such a room full of beautiful women made Su Chan feel a headache for Li Yundong. It was fine if there were more and more women, but the time she spent with Li Yundong was getting shorter and shorter, which made Su Chan really depressed. Therefore the little girl came up with such a drastic idea. Early in the morning she secretly encouraged Ziyuan with the saying that women do not sacrifice themselves to the kitchen stove, and then played a back thrust. Li Yundong saw that the little girl was speaking pitifully, but the corners of her eyes were full of slyness and pride. He couldn't help laughing and said, "You little girl, do you feel very proud after deceiving so many people?" The pitiful expression on Su Chan's face suddenly disappeared and was replaced by a triumphant expression. She said with a smile, "It's fine if it's others, but it's really rare to be able to deceive Sister Ziyuan." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Really? From what I see, Ziyuan is giving in to you. How could she not see through your little scheme? Didn't you see her smiling without saying a word?" Although this girl was a bit stubborn, she wasn't a stubborn person. Besides, wasn't it just women not sacrificing to the kitchen stove? Wouldn't it be fine if she didn't participate in the ceremony? Why did he have to run? "I'm catering to you." Su Chan opened her mouth. She thought for a moment and felt that what Li Yundong had said was reasonable, but she was still a little unconvinced. She said, "Really? When Sister Ziyuan comes back I'll ask her." Li Yundong said with a smile, "Don't ask. With her personality, even if she sees through it she won't point it out, let alone say it. Moreover, there must be others who have seen through your thoughts. Do you believe me?" Su Chan snorted and said, "I don't believe it. No one else is so smart." As soon as she finished speaking, she heard the sound of the door outside. After a while there was the sound of hurried footsteps coming upstairs. A figure quickly passed by Li Yundong's door, but as soon as it passed, the person suddenly poked his head out of the door and said with a surprised expression, "Su Chan, why are you back?" As soon as Su Chan saw this person, she became angry. "Ling Yu, why are you back?" A meaningful smile flashed across Ling Yu's eyes. She giggled and said, "I forgot to take my wallet, so I came back to get it." As she said this, she winked at Su Chan as if she didn't know what to say. Seeing that Ling Yu had ruined her plan, Su Chan was so angry that she wanted to bite this damned girl. She puffed up her cheeks angrily and ground her gums. She gritted her teeth and said, "That be asterisk starred, she has never used a wallet. She puts all her money directly in her pocket. Does she think I don't know?" While she was losing her temper in a low voice, she saw Ling Yu sweep past the door like a gust of wind. After that, she leaned back and poked her beautiful head out of the door. She said with a smile, "Su-chan, have fun with the leader. I'll go out first." As she said this, she retracted her head, but as soon as she retracted it, she quickly poked it out again and said with a sneaky smile, "Don't worry, I won't tell anyone else." This last sentence made Su-chan so angry that she stamped her feet. Li Yundong, who was beside her, looked at her with an expression that said, "Look, what did I just say?" He had a strange expression on his face. After stamping her feet for a while, Su-chan finally lowered her head dejectedly. Her small mouth was pouting high, and her face was full of resentment. Her eyes were full of unconcealable loss and disappointment. Li Yundong couldn't bear to see her like this, so he hugged the little girl and said softly with a smile, "Well, silly girl, don't worry about what they think. As long as you're happy." The little girl shook her head bitterly and said in a low voice, "No, I can't let them gossip behind my back. I'd better go shopping with them." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Don't be silly. They can probably guess that you will sneak back halfway. Besides, you are my real girlfriend. What can they gossip about?" The little girl still just shook her head as if her little self-esteem had been hurt, and her face was sad. Seeing that he couldn't persuade her, Li Yundong had to settle for the next best thing. He said, "Well, you go. I'll go with you, okay?" The little girl wanted to stay alone with Li Yundong. If they went together, there would be no chance for them to talk intimately. However, the little girl didn't say what she was thinking. She forced a smile and said, "Okay, let's go together." The little girl didn't say anything, but Li Yundong could see it. He looked into her eyes and suddenly laughed. "Forget it, I won't go. If you're not happy, I'll go." Su-chan quickly raised her head and said, "No, no." She was about to argue, but she heard Li Yundong whisper in her ear, "Silly girl, you sneaked into my room at night." When Su-chan heard this, she was stunned for a moment, but then she smiled and nodded her head like a chick pecking rice. She smiled without a nose or eyes, stretched out her little finger and giggled. "Don't go back on your word." Li Yundong laughed and crooked his finger at the little girl, saying, "Okay, I won't go back on my word." Only then did the little girl completely change from worry to joy. She bounced out of the door after Ling Yu's figure. The group of beautiful women wandered around outside for almost a day. After Li Yundong worshipped the kitchen god at home, they had a sumptuous dinner together. After dinner, everyone went back to their own rooms to cultivate. The little girl waited impatiently until it was dark. When most of the people went to bed, she carefully and quietly left the door like a thief. She came to Li Yundong's room and gently pushed the door open, only to see that it was unlocked. Obviously, Li Yundong was waiting for her. She was delighted and took a look inside. Sure enough, she saw Li Yundong sitting cross-legged on the bed, looking at her with a smile. Li Yundong's gaze made Su-chan feel a little hot all over, and her cheeks turned red. However, she quickly got into the room and locked the door. Immediately, she climbed onto the bed and threw herself into Li Yundong's arms like a swallow flying into the forest. She raised her jade-like face, pouted her rosy pink lips and whispered, "Let's have a kiss first." Li Yundong held Su-chan in his arms, lowered his head fiercely, and kissed the little girl's red lips hard. The sound of his kiss startled Su-chan. The little girl looked around with a guilty look, as if she was afraid that the people in the next room could hear them. Seeing her like this, Li Yundong immediately laughed and said, "What are you doing? Are you afraid that others will know that you're being intimate with your man?" Su-chan's face turned red and she giggled. "You're so shameless. You're not my man yet." Li Yundong wrapped his arms around Su-chan's slender waist and kissed her snow-white neck intimately. "Then tonight I'll make you my woman and you'll make me your man," he said. "What do you say?" Su-chan's body went soft when she heard this, and her lower abdomen felt hot. She covered her face with her hands and said shyly, "No." Li Yundong pretended to be angry. "Why not? Then what are you doing here tonight?" Su-chan twisted her body and said coquettishly, "It's too cold to sleep alone, so I came to ask for warmth." Li Yundong chuckled. "It's warmer to do some exercise." As he said this, his hand reached out to the little girl's full chest. Su-chan's whole body trembled, and her body immediately softened into a pool of mud and fell into his arms. Her nose opened and closed and her breath smelled like orchids. She looked at him coquettishly, her eyes full of love and infatuation. In the eyes of the little girl, she could give everything to the man in front of her. There was nothing to hesitate about. But even so, the little girl still reached out and grabbed Li Yundong's hand. "No, not today," she said, panting. Then she looked at the next room. Li Yundong laughed. "What? Afraid that they'll hear you? Don't worry, I won't make a sound even if you beat me to death." Su Chan's face turned red and she giggled. "I'm afraid that they'll hear me?" Her words were too powerful. Even though Li Yundong had a strong self-control, he was still provoked by the little girl in front of him. His whole body was on fire, and a pillar under his abdomen rose to the sky. Li Yundong smiled bitterly. "Then do you have the heart to watch me suffer?" he said, looking down at his lower body with a pained expression. Blushing, Su Chan mustered up the courage to reach out her hand and gently grab the man's arm. "How about I?" Before she could finish, Li Yundong cut her off with a straight face. "No. I've had enough of the 5 dragons embracing pillar. Today I want to practice something else." Su Chan looked up, and the corners of her eyes were full of rippling waves. She giggled. "What do you want to practice?" Li Yundong thought for a moment, then put on a straight face and said seriously, "Today, let's practice one move, 24 moonlit bridges, where the beautiful woman can teach you how to play the flute." This sentence was so vulgar that Su Chan couldn't understand it. Her cheeks suddenly turned so red that they looked like they were about to bleed. She gave Li Yundong a coquettish look, then suddenly lowered her head and buried her head. Li Yundong was originally just joking with the little girl, but he didn't expect her to really practice the jade woman blowing the flute. Even though he was the reincarnation of the Wisdom King, with a profound understanding of Buddhism and a strong self-control at this time, he couldn't help but feel his heart shake, his mind go dark, and his whole body feel like it was about to explode. He couldn't help but shout happily, but as soon as he shouted, the little girl raised her head and said, "You're so annoying. I can hear you." Li Yundong smiled bitterly. "But I can't help it either. What should I do?" Su Chan giggled. "Well, you can wait here for me to say that." "I don't care, I can't help it." Li Yundong's face was full of worry. He thought for a moment, then suddenly put on a straight face and said, "Then I'll recite a poem. You continue." Su Chan laughed and spat, "Bah, you're a dirty poem. Shame, you're so shameless." Li Yundong pretended to be angry and glared at her. "Nonsense, I'm reciting a poem by a great man. Listen carefully. The scenery of the north, thousands of miles of ice, thousands of miles of snow." When Su Chan saw that he was seriously reciting a poem, she giggled and continued to bend down. In the past she had read many Taoist books about plucking and nourishing, and one of them talked about sexual techniques. She had thought that it was dirty and disgusting, but today she felt that it was not dirty at all to please her sweetheart. Instead, she felt very happy. There was nothing better than this between a man and a woman. Li Yundong recited the poem seriously. At first it was serious, but later the poem carried forward his good tradition of tampering with famous lines and became a downright dirty poem. Su Chan only heard Li Yundong reciting, "There are so many beauties in the world, attracting countless heroes to bow down." Unfortunately, Qin Huang and Han Wu were slightly lacking in literary talent, and Tang Zong and Song Zhu were slightly lacking in coquettishness. A generation of fox demons, little girl Su Chan, is good at hugging a pillar and playing the flute. As soon as the girl heard this, her face suddenly turned red. She threw herself on Li Yundong, pinching him with both hands, scratching and biting. She gritted her teeth and said, "Say it again, say it again. You're the one who's good at hugging a pillar and playing the flute." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He grabbed the little girl's wrist with both hands and began to play with her on the bed with a smile. The two of them laughed and joked for a while. Su Chan pouted and refused to be the fox demon of this generation anymore. Li Yundong had no choice but to coax her in a low voice, "All right, I was wrong. Can't I make amends for my sins? Stop it. The night is long. Do you want to waste it like this?" Su Chan was not really angry. She snorted angrily and said concisely, "Sleep?" Li Yundong was shocked. So many distinguished men are all sleeping? Seeing that Li Yundong had tampered with the poem again, Su Chan finally couldn't help but burst into laughter. She suddenly thought of Li Yundong's classic lines, "If two lovers love each other for a long time, why do they sleep on the bed?" And the line, "What is love in the world? It makes people take off their clothes and pants." Thinking of this, the girl recalled all the bits and pieces of the two of them together, and her heart couldn't help but be moved. She raised her head, her eyes like silk, and said charmingly, "Master, if you don't sleep, what will you do all night?" Li Yundong coughed dryly, his expression changed, and he waved his hand and said, "Isn't it simple? All of them are gone. Even the most distinguished men are playing all night." Chapter 790. The next day, Su Chan snuck out of Li Yundong's room as if she were a thief. As soon as she stepped out of the room, she saw Little Fox, who had already woken up early and was practicing qi in the living room. Little Fox was already out of bed. When the little foxes in the living room heard the noise, they all turned around and looked at Su Chan with meaningful smiles. Their smiles made Su Chan's hair stand on end. She glared at the little foxes and raised her fists to show off. Her fierce eyes seemed to be saying, "What are you looking at?" The little foxes giggled, turned their heads and closed their eyes again to meditate. Seeing that she had scared them, Su Chan breathed a sigh of relief and sneaked back to her room. However, as soon as she turned her head, she saw Zhou Qin standing in front of her. The little girl was startled and asked guiltily, "Sister Zhou Qin, why are you up so early?" Zhou Qin didn't seem to know where Su Chan had come from. She smiled and said, "Didn't you get up earlier?" Su Chan blushed and stammered, "I." Zhou Qin smiled and said, "Master, are you up yet?" At this time, Li Yundong, who was in the room, also heard Zhou Qin's voice and shouted, "Zhou Qin, what's the matter?" Su Chan felt as if she had been pardoned and quickly said, "You go talk to Yundong. I'll go back first." As she said this, she slipped away from Zhou Qin. But as soon as she entered the room and threw herself on the bed, the little girl found something wrong. "Strange, why did I feel like I was having an affair with Yundong when I was so intimate with him? Why did I feel like I was caught in bed just now? It's so strange." Su Chan couldn't help scratching her head with both hands and rubbing her hair. She was a little depressed and said in a low voice, "I hate it. I don't like this feeling. Really." At this time, when Zhou Qin saw Su Chan enter the room, her eyes quickly flashed with sadness, but it was only for a moment. Soon she calmed down, opened the door and entered Li Yundong's room. Li Yundong was sitting cross-legged on the edge of the bed and looking at Zhou Qin with a smile. "It's so early. What's the matter?" Zhou Qin turned around and closed the door. After thinking for a moment, she said softly, "Master, didn't you say that you would go to Desangxian early in the morning? Have you forgotten?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "How could I forget? But isn't it too early now? It's only 6 o'clock, right?" Zhou Qin smiled. "But we still have to write couplets. You want to steam flour buns?" Li Yundong nodded and said, "That's right. You seem to be very busy today." Zhou Qin pursed her lips slightly and smiled. "Well, that's right. But, Master, can I ask, Ziyuan's 2 magic treasures? When can they be repaired?" Li Yundong looked at her strangely. "Why do you suddenly ask about this?" Zhou Qin bit her lip gently and said, "There are many parts of the secret method of patching heaven that I don't understand, and the method of repairing powerful magical weapons described in it is too difficult. I'm afraid that you won't have time to repair it before the next inauguration ceremony. Moreover, I don't know how Chao Kefi is doing now. Aren't you afraid that she will suddenly become a mystical silver fox and you won't even have time to save her?" When it came to Ziyuan and Chao Kefi, the smile on Li Yundong's face faded slightly. He said, "You don't have to worry. When I saw Chao Kefi last time, she was still in a stable state of mind. She should be fine. Moreover, it's useless for us to be anxious now because there are 2 ways to repair powerful magical weapons. One is to use all kinds of materials to forcibly repair powerful magical weapons. This method takes too long, and where can we find the materials? Who knows what materials these 2 powerful magical weapons were made of?" Zhou Qin asked, "What about the other way?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "How do you read? How could you forget the 2 important sentences in the secret method of patching heaven? Although it is said that the way of heaven is to destroy excess and make up for deficiency, the way of man is to destroy deficiency and make up for excess. But if you want to repair powerful magical weapons, you have to use the way of human beings to make up for excess. Think about it, when will God lose his own power, and we can use this part of power to strengthen ourselves and realize giving surplus?" Zhou Qin understood immediately and her eyes lit up. "I understand. It's the thunder retribution." Li Yundong nodded with a smile. "That's right. Only during the thunder retribution can we use the power of God to repair this powerful magical weapon. Otherwise, it will be as difficult as ascending to heaven with human strength." Zhou Qin thought for a moment, but soon a puzzled look appeared on her face. Since it's so difficult to repair powerful magical weapons, why did Yu Qing help me so readily? This question stumped Li Yundong. He was obviously stunned. He pondered for a moment and thought to himself, could it be that Yu Qing was just being polite before? Or could it be that the method of repairing powerful magical weapons is not completely recorded in the secret method of patching heaven? Li Yundong thought for a moment, raised his head and said, let's put this matter aside first. The matter of repairing powerful magical weapons can't be rushed. Help me contact Chow Kefi and see if she's free. If she's free, ask her to come to us. By the way, wait a minute. Call Lu Feier and ask her to contact Chow Kefi. Don't contact her. It's best to let her stay here until the Thunder Retribution comes. Zhou Qin answered readily and turned to go out the door. But as soon as she went out, she thought of something and turned back with a sly and mischievous look in her eyes. She pursed her lips and said with a smile, Master, you have to write the Spring Festival couplets by yourself today? Li Yundong was shocked. I'll write it? Are you sure you didn't make a mistake? Can you show me my handwriting? Zhou Qin covered her mouth and said with a smile, I don't care. You are the leader and the chairman of Desanxian. If you don't write it yourself, it won't make sense, will it? Li Yundong scolded her with a smile, nonsense. It's just a small tea house. How can it be the chairman? Aren't you afraid of being laughed at? Zhou Qin smiled and said, it's small now, but it's not necessarily the case in the future. It's definitely right to set up the rules early. Li Yundong just shook his head and refused to write by himself no matter what. Forget it, you guys set up your own rules. I will never write this word. Otherwise, if people see my handwriting, they will laugh themselves to death. Next time I fight with someone, I won't do anything. If I write a word in front of him, he will laugh himself to death. Zhou Qin couldn't help laughing and her shoulders trembled. Master, if you don't write Spring Festival couplets, you have to help us think about what to write, right? Li Yundong sighed and said, no way do I have to think about this? Really, don't you know that I'm very busy? Zhou Qin rolled her eyes and suddenly said, are you busy playing all night? Li Yundong was about to get out of bed. When he heard this, he almost fell to the ground. He widened his eyes and deliberately stared at Zhou Qin with a straight face. It's not a good habit to eavesdrop. Zhou Qin pretended to be surprised and said, what do you mean by eavesdropping? Master, what are you talking about? Li Yundong saw that her appearance didn't seem to be fake and couldn't help but be stunned. He thought to himself, isn't it? Is she just saying it casually? Li Yundong didn't want to continue this topic, so he waved his hand and said, okay, I got it. I'll think about the couplets later. You can go and do your work. Zhou Qin pursed her lips and smiled. Okay, then I'm leaving. But not long after she left, she poked her head out again and said quickly, Master, next time you talk in a lower voice. After that, she giggled and quickly ran away. Li Yundong was so angry that he almost laughed. This evil disciple, if he didn't beat her for 3 days, she would tear the tiles off her roof. After more than an hour, Ziyuan, Su Chan, Ruan Hongling, Zhou Qin, and the others gathered in the living room and were discussing what to write next. Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and Su Chan were also warming up by practicing calligraphy on the Xin paper with pens in their hands. Except for Li Yundong, almost everyone in the hall was good at writing. Among them, Ziyuan had copied the calligraphy of the 2 kings since she was a child, namely the calligraphy of Wang Shiji and his son Wang Xianji. Wang Shiji's calligraphy was dignified and delicate, like floating clouds, and refined in style. Wang Xianji's calligraphy could be said to beat Phoenix dance in the Pill Cave, Dragon leap in the clear spring. After copying their calligraphy for more than 10 years, Ziyuan finally formed her own style, ingeniously merging the 2 styles into one. It had both the beauty and elegance of the king and the elegance of the young king, faintly showing the demeanor of a great master. Zhou Qin had learned the calligraphy of Yan Jinqing since she was a child. As the saying goes, the muscles of Yan and the bones of Lu refer to Yan Jinqing's calligraphy, which was rich in strength, dignified and graceful. Su Chan, on the other hand, had learned the calligraphy of Wu Cailuan, a famous female Taoist priest in the Tang dynasty. Her regular script was magnificent and beautiful, and her pen was smooth. Although it could not be compared with the bearing of a great master like Ziyuan, nor could it be compared with the solemn atmosphere of Zhou Qin's calligraphy, it revealed a different kind of feminine and charming beauty. When Li Yundong came down the stairs, he saw Ruan Hongling, Lin Miao, and the big and small foxes of the Fox Zen school watching the 3 of them write seriously at the dining table in the living room. He walked over quietly and watched them quietly write. He seemed to understand something in his heart. As the saying goes, calligraphy is like a person. From a person's handwriting, a person's character can be analyzed, and even their future achievements and fate can be inferred. Although Ziyuan's calligraphy was of an extremely high realm and was elegant and otherworldly, her calligraphy was extremely particular about style, showing that she was a person who followed the rules and attached importance to rules and tradition. Although Zhou Qin's calligraphy was dignified and elegant, the sharpness between the strokes was revealing a competitive spirit of entering the world. Su Chan's calligraphy was playful and lively. She did not pay attention to style, nor did she have the slightest sharpness. The strokes between the strokes were as smooth as jade. It was obvious that she was free to write whatever she wanted. Li Yundong looked at the three completely different women, and his heart suddenly moved. He thought to himself, this Desangxian is really suitable. Aren't they just an ethereal fairy, a worldly fairy and a naughty fox fairy? Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. Good calligraphy, good calligraphy. In the future, the Desangxian will hang your calligraphy everywhere. It will definitely be a treasure in the future. Everyone looked at him with joy. As soon as Su Chan saw him, she immediately smiled and subconsciously wanted to pounce on him to act coquettishly. However, she remembered the embarrassing things that had happened between them yesterday and stopped for a moment. Her cheeks were flushed and she lowered her head to hide her shyness. Ziyuan smiled at Li Yundong and said, "You're here? We're all waiting for your Spring Festival couplets." Li Yundong clapped his hands and said, "Okay, as long as you don't let me write, I can do whatever you want me to. Spring Festival couplets, right? Listen carefully. The first couplet is, next spring will be very unlucky. The second couplet is, bad luck all year round, less wealth." As soon as he said the couplet, everyone burst out laughing. Even a foreign girl like Lin Miao was amused. She also knew that this was not an auspicious couplet. It was clearly a curse for her own bad business. Zhou Qin smiled and said, "Master, no one curses themselves like that, right?" Ziyuan smiled and didn't say anything. She quickly wrote these two sentences on 2 pieces of red paper. Su Chan couldn't help but stare at her and say, "Sister Ziyuan, are you really going to write this? You don't really want to hang up this couplet, do you?" Ziyuan smiled and said, "You've all been fooled. Li Yundong is very cunning." Li Yundong laughed and said, "My parents gave birth to me and Ziyuan knows me well. Look carefully." As he said this, he followed the 2 rows of couplets written by Ziyuan, pointed at the words with his fingers and read them again word by word. The first couplet is, next spring will be very good and there will be no bad luck. The second couplet is, less bad luck all year round, more wealth. Everyone immediately laughed and cheered. Zhou Qin smiled and said, "So that's how it is. But this couplet is not festive enough, and it doesn't highlight the characteristics of our tea house. No, I have to think of another one." Everyone also clamored and said, "Yes, yes, think of another one." Li Yundong thought for a moment, then clapped his hands and said with a smile, "Yes, listen to this. The sparrow's tongue has not been rained in March, and the dragon bud has been lit in spring." The sparrow's tongue was a kind of tea, and the dragon bud was also a kind of tea. This couplet not only pointed out the characteristics of the tea house's business, but it was also elegant and romantic. When everyone heard this, they all applauded. But at this time, Su Chan felt that the sparrow's tongue seemed to be hinting at something. Last night, Yundong had praised her fragrant tongue as a sparrow's tongue, hadn't he? The more the girl thought about it, the more she blushed, especially when she stole a glance at Li Yundong. When she saw him looking over, Su Chan's heart skipped a beat and she immediately couldn't restrain herself. She waved her hand and said, "No, no, this can't be done." Ling Yu, who was next to her, said curiously, "Such a good couplet, why not?" Su Chan's cheeks turned red and she said incoherently, "This couplet is not good. It's too vulgar." His words caused everyone's praises to come to an abrupt halt. They all looked at each other in dismay, and their expressions were truly marvelous. It was a perfectly good couplet, but when Su Chan said it like that, everyone suddenly felt that there was a different meaning hidden between the lines of the couplet. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He thought to himself, "My girl, you really confessed without being pressed." Chapter 791. Su Chan soon realized that she had spoken too quickly and said something wrong. She blushed even more, but at this time she could only suppress her shyness, straighten her neck and say, "We don't have these 2 kinds of tea in our shop, so it's not good." Thanks to Su Chan's quick wit, she had come up with such a far-fetched reason. But even if it was far-fetched, it was still a reason. The crowd was also very sensible and did not continue to ask questions. What does it have to do with whether the two kinds of tea are obscene or not? Li Yundong also quickly took the opportunity to step down. He coughed dryly and said, "Then I'll think of another couplet. Well, listen to this. Condense into the cloud and mist of Mount Huangshan, float out the morning dew fragrance of Jiuhua. How about this?" In this couplet, the first couplet mentioned the famous tea Mount Huangshan Maofeng, and the second couplet mentioned the famous tea of Jiuhua Yunjian. Among them, the tea of Mount Huangshan was mainly Taoist tea, while the tea of Mount Jiuhua was mostly Buddhist tea. In the upper and lower couplets, there were both famous Taoist tea and Buddhist tea. It was really profound, secretly alluding to the cultivation realm of Li Yundong, the master of Desangxian, who cultivated both Buddhism and Taoism. Most of the people present were knowledgeable. When they heard this couplet, their eyes suddenly lit up and they couldn't help but cheer loudly. Ziyuan also nodded and said with a smile, "This couplet is good." As she said this, she picked up the brush and began to write. Zhou Qin pursed her lips and teased Su Chan, "Well, we have these two kinds of tea in our shop, don't we?" Su Chan was so embarrassed that her ears were burning, and they were so red that they seemed to be dripping blood. She stamped her feet and said, "You're so annoying. You're bullying me." Everyone laughed. Li Yundong smiled and walked to Su Chan's side, rubbed her black hair dotingly and said with a smile, "Well, the three of you write a couplet each. Didn't I say 3 couplets before? One for each person." As he said this, Li Yundong winked at Su Chan and said, "Do you want to write that one?" Su Chan said angrily, "I won't write it, I won't write it. Whoever wants to write it can write it." After that, she covered her face and rushed to her room. Li Yundong laughed behind her. After the group of people finished writing the couplet, they went to Desangxian. Lin Miao also followed Li Yundong. Although she was an American, she knew a lot about China. She didn't know much about Chinese customs. She only felt that it was new and curious. Even though she came from a rich family, she still felt a little excited at this time, and she was looking forward. When they arrived at Desangxian, Feng Na, Ching Ching, and the others were already busy in the store. As soon as they saw Li Yundong, they all greeted him with a smile. Li Yundong smiled and handed 3 couplets to Feng Na, asking her to hang them at the door and inside the store for good luck. It was early in the morning, so naturally the tea house wouldn't have any business. Most of the customers who came to drink tea would only arrive after noon. Li Yundong glanced at the busy waiters in the shop, who were stealing glances at him from time to time. To his surprise, he found that many of them looked very familiar. "By the way," he said, "I came and left in a hurry last time, so I didn't get to ask you where you hired these new waiters from. Don't tell me you hired them from school?" Feng Na laughed. "Isn't that so? You can be considered to be repaying society and supporting your alma mater. This is called keeping the goodies within the family." Li Yundong laughed and said, "I'm not that noble. This is all you're doing. I don't dare to be greedy." Feng Na laughed and said, "Without you as the stage, I would like to help my alumni, but I don't have the ability to. Don't stand on ceremony or you'll be pretentious." Li Yundong chuckled, turned to the waiters in the shop and said, "Don't sneak around. If you want to see it, do it openly. It's not like you haven't seen it in school before." Some of these female students were older than Li Yundong, some were his classmates and some were his junior sisters. When they heard Li Yundong's words, they all laughed. Li Yundong's name was like thunder in their ears. Some of them had heard it so much that their ears were almost calloused. But now they saw this legendary figure of Tiannan University, who had started his own business from scratch in his junior year. He had made such an achievement at the beginning, which was really admirable. When they saw that Li Yundong was talking and smiling as usual and approachable, they couldn't help but sigh in their hearts. But when they heard that Li Yundong promised to give each of them a red envelope after the Spring Festival, even the most reserved girls couldn't help cheering. For a moment, there was constant cheering in Desangxian. Feng Na looked at the excited red faces and couldn't help sighing. "I can't imagine that I can help so many alumni as soon as I leave school. Speaking of which, many of my classmates are envious of me." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Really? You should use your privilege as the president of the student union and call on your classmates to have tea." Feng Na laughed and scolded, "Don't you know that I've already resigned? I'm not the president of the student union for a long time. Moreover, the price of your Desangxian is so expensive. If you ask your classmates to come and have tea, aren't you cheating them?" Li Yundong clicked his tongue and said, "Do you think so badly of me? Of course, alumni will get a discount, But now that you're not the president of the student union, who will be? It can't be Yan Hua, can it? Feng Na tilted her head and said, who else could it be? My position as the president of the student union was originally thanks to you. I snatched it from him. Isn't it just right to give it back to him now? Li Yundong laughed and said, this guy has always disliked the two of us. Now that the two people who disliked the most have left, he can be the king alone. Feng Na laughed. Just as she was about to speak, she suddenly heard a burst of laughter coming from outside. Then a group of young men and women came in. The girl in the lead looked at the door and said with a smile, oh, it's open. I told you it would be open now. Feng Na looked out curiously and saw that the people were all cadres of the student union. After Feng Na became the president of the student union, she got along with them quite well. At this time when she saw them, she immediately laughed and asked, why are you here? The girl in the lead smiled and said, what? You don't welcome us? If you don't welcome us, well, we'll go home now. Feng Na quickly smiled and said, don't. I'm happy that you're here. Come in and sit down. By the way, look, who is this? As she said this, she pointed to Li Yundong beside her. Although the cadres of the student union were more or less influential figures in the school, compared with Li Yundong they were too inferior. Moreover, when they chatted on weekdays they often mentioned this legendary figure from time to time. Now that they saw him in person, they were so excited that many of them shouted, Li Yundong, we want to watch Master Tsang's Days of Living with a Stewardess. Li Yundong remembered the incident in the school auditorium and laughed angrily. You guys, if you want to watch an action movie, go home. This is a tea house. Everyone laughed and entered the tea house one after another. Feng Na took the girl in the lead and said with an affectionate smile, it's the New Year's Eve. You haven't gone back yet? The girl smiled and said, no, the school is going to be expanded next year. The cadres of the student union stayed behind to help. They won't go back until 2 days later. Feng Na smiled and said, then why aren't you busy today? Why did you come here? The girl smiled and pointed to the door saying, our president suggested it, so we came. Feng Na was stunned. She followed the direction of her finger and looked outside, only to see Yan Hua standing quietly outside the door with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. If someone hadn't told her that Yan Huang was outside the door, Feng Na would have ignored his existence. In Feng Na's impression, Yan Hua was a very domineering and conceited boy. No matter where he went, he could not wait for everyone's attention to be focused on him. His desire to show off and control was extremely strong, and he was not willing to be lonely at any time. If he was like him, where everyone greeted them enthusiastically while he quietly watched from the side, it would be absolutely inconceivable. Feng Na was stunned and couldn't help but look at Li Yundong. At this time, Li Yundong was also muttering to himself, you can't talk about ghosts at night, but you can't talk about people during the day. Speak of the devil. How could it be so coincidental? Li Yundong glanced at Yan Huang and felt that although the Yan Hua in front of him was beautiful, there was no longer the masculine and conceited air between his eyebrows. His eyebrows had originally been sharp like swords, but at this time they had become blunt and tended to be soft. His temperament had changed dramatically. Li Yundong was secretly surprised and thought to himself, why does this guy seem to have suddenly become a different person? It's so strange. But no matter how smart and powerful he was, he would never have thought that the Yan Hua at this time was actually his aunt, Yan Fang. This big rival who had always been against him could be so cruel as to forcibly occupy her nephew's body. Although Li Yundong felt strange, he didn't think about it. He didn't expect that Yan Fang would be so ruthless as to castrate herself for cultivation, so her temperament had changed. Yan Fang was also betting that Li Yundong wouldn't recognize her. At this time she looked calm, but her heart was already in turmoil. She had been defeated by Li Yundong again and again before, and deep in her heart she had a strong fear of Li Yundong. As long as Li Yundong showed the slightest intention of making a move, she would desperately take the nearest classmate and use this person as a hostage to escape from here. But this time Yan Fang was right. Li Yundong was not an immortal. He didn't expect that she would have such an amazing change, let alone that she would appear in front of him at this time. As soon as Yan Fang saw Li Yundong's gaze, her heart was set, and then she was ecstatic. After castrating this man's 7-treasure body, her cultivation had finally advanced by leaps and bounds. Although the male root had been broken and the yang qi had been cut off from then on, Yan Hua's virgin yuan yang qi was still there before. It was this yuan yang qi that had been torturing Yan Hua to death. At this time the male root had been broken. When she ran her qi again, there would be no distracting thoughts. This Yuanyang Qi perfectly merged with her virgin Shenin Qi. At this time Yin and Yang were combined, and Yanfang's cultivation had undergone an amazing change. In just a few days Yanfang had recultivated to the top phase of Yang spirit, only one step away from the Jinshin. Although the current phase was far from being a threat to Li Yundong, she knew that her chance had come again. Chapter 792. In Li Yundong's opinion, although he had some friction with Yan Hua, it was just a dispute over personal feelings. It was not a life-or-death feud. At this time, Yan Hua had brought his former schoolmates to support him. Whether it was good or bad, out of politeness, Li Yundong couldn't be rude. He smiled slightly and nodded to Yan Hua at the door. "It's really an honor for Mr. President to come. Why don't you come in and have a seat?" Yanfang stared at Li Yundong with an expressionless face. She just nodded to Li Yundong and then entered the tea house. Although Li Yundong saw that he didn't compete with him, and his attitude was still relatively cold, this was in line with Yan Hua's character and reaction. He didn't take it to heart. He turned his head and whispered to Feng Na, asking her to take out the good tea in the shop and entertain his senior and junior sisters well today. After Yanfang sat down in her seat, although she looked straight at the tea table in front of her, she had been carefully looking around out of the corner of her eyes. Her ears were pricked up, listening to everyone around her. She had originally wanted to come to Desangxian today to get some information from the little foxes. She had lurked in the Fox Zen school for 9 years, so she naturally knew that these little foxes were big mouths that couldn't keep their mouths shut. However, she hadn't expected to meet Li Yundong and the others here today, especially Zi Yuan. She knew very well what kind of person her Shiji was. As long as she showed the slightest abnormality, Zi Yuan would be able to detect it. Therefore at this time she was highly nervous and kept a low profile. Feng Na saw Yan Hua sitting at the tea table so silently looking down. She felt strange in her heart. Although her relationship with Yan Huang was not very good, it was not as bad as the relationship between Li Yundong and Yan Hua. Moreover, they were classmates after all, and they were both cadres of the student union. Sometimes when they met each other they would still talk politely. Feng Na sat next to Yan Huan and said with a smile, "Yan Hua, you are so strange today. In the past when you saw Li Yundong you wanted to go up and bite him. Why did you not only come to support him today but also be so polite?" Yan Fang smiled slightly. She thought about it carefully as if she was weighing her words and said, "After all, we were all classmates. How could there be any unspeakable hatred between us?" Feng Na laughed when she heard that. "That's right, that's the truth. It's better to squash enmity than keep it alive. Moreover, there is no great enmity between the two of you." Yan Fang smiled, but she sneered in her heart. She glanced at Li Yundong and after a closer look she suddenly found that Li Yundong had reached the perfect jade body realm, which meant that he had reached the peak of the Jinshin phase. Once he passed the thunder tribulation he would be a half-immortal in the world. Cultivating to become a half-immortal in 1 year, wasn't this too terrifying? Even Wang Chongyang and ancestor Chen Tuan weren't so exaggerated, right? Yan Fang was shocked. Although there was no expression on her face, her hands, which were hidden under the table, were trembling slightly. At this moment she felt the uncertainty and despair of revenge. His opponent was too strong, so strong that no matter how hard he tried to catch up, he could only look at his back. Perhaps only his senior brother Wang Yuanshan could be compared to him. But his senior brother. Thinking of this, Yan Fang felt sad in her heart. For the first time her desire for revenge was shaken. In addition, these days for the first time in more than 9 years, she experienced the mystery and wonder of cultivation. In Jin Yang's The Smiling, Proud Wanderer, Dongfang Bubi described his feeling after practicing the Sunflower Manual. He said that after castration he practiced according to the secret method, refining elixirs and taking medicine, and gradually understood the truth of heaven and earth, and understood the happiest thing in the world. Although Dongfang Bubi fell in love with a man in the end, after he castrated himself, Jin Yong described the realm he had experienced, which was indeed not wrong at all. In particular, Yan Fang used the virgin qi of Yin to enter the body of Yuan Yang. Once the Yin and Yang were combined, the two qis merged into one, and the new qi was born. The realm that could be experienced was really not enough to be known to outsiders. Especially since the Ming dynasty, the castration faction in the cultivation world had disappeared, and there would not be a woman who would be cruel enough to destroy her own body and enter a man's body. What's more, she was cruel enough to castrate herself to cultivate. Only a woman like Yen Fong, who was extremely cruel and merciless, could do this. This kind of coincidence was no less than Li Yundong's, but it was a little too cruel. What Yen Fong had learned from her cultivation in the past few days was far more than what she had learned in the past decades. Especially after she finished running her qi, she felt a kind of carefree and ghastly happiness, which really intoxicated her. Yen Fong knew that as long as she persisted in cultivation, she would definitely be able to break through to the Jinshin phase in less than a year. Moreover, once she broke through to the Jinshin phase, she would definitely be able to break through to the Thunder Retribution phase soon. Once she reached the Thunder Retribution phase, she would really be able to go anywhere no matter how big the world was. But even so what? It would take her a year to break through to the Jinshin phase, but Li Yundong had already reached the peak of the Jinshin phase. What realm would he be in a year later? Yen Fong shivered at the thought of it. One step slower and she would always be slower. Moreover, Li Yundong had so many powerful magical weapons in his hands, and Ziyuan, Zhou Qin and the others were helping him. How could she take revenge empty-handed? Although her schemes were powerful, in the face of absolute strength, no matter how powerful they were vulnerable. At this moment, Yen Fong thought in panic, I'm afraid I won't be able to take revenge in this life. I'd better cultivate peacefully. Let's improve my strength first. Although she had a disciple, Song Yuqiao, she had lost contact with him after the Taoist assembly. Moreover, now that she had become like this, how could she see her? Yen Fong's heart was heavy. She didn't even hear what Feng Na was saying to her. She just responded with a few words. Seeing that Yen Hua was not in the mood to talk, Feng Na stopped talking to him. The other alumni of the student union who had come with Yen Fong did not notice the abnormality of the president of the student union. They were all talking excitedly with Li Yundong and asking all kinds of questions. Li Yundong was a little confused by them, and all kinds of strange questions came one after another. Fortunately, at this time, a person suddenly walked into the Desangxian and rescued him. Li Yundong turned his head and saw Zhang Lufang standing at the door, craning her neck to look into the store. The junior shimmy of the Jingyi school shouted in a crisp voice, Jinren, you're really here. I went to your house before but I couldn't find you. Although Li Yundong didn't have a good relationship with the Jingyi school, Zhang Lufang was one of the few cultivators who had shown kindness to him. Especially now that there was a festival going on, she was smiling. As the saying goes, don't hit a smiling person. No matter how dissatisfied Li Yundong was with the Jingyi school, he still greeted her with a smile. He had heard from Ziyuan that she was Zhang Kongyun's disciple. Her surname was also Zhang, and she had the bloodline of Zhang Tianshi. However, she was a concubine. Although her bloodline was not pure, she was beautiful, had a pleasant personality and was very likable. She was very popular in the Jingyi school. Because there were his alumni in the shop, Li Yundong did not salute them. He just nodded to Zhang Lufang and said with a smile, Hello Jinren Zhang. This is your first time coming to the Desangxian, isn't it? Zhang Lufang rolled her eyes on Li Yundong's face. Suddenly she covered her mouth and whispered in surprise, Oh, have you cultivated to the perfect jade body? That's amazing. TSK, your skin is even better than mine. I'm so angry. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing and said, Jinren Zhang, you didn't come here just to praise my good skin, did you? Do you want me to introduce you to some skincare products? Zhang Lufang smiled and said, Jinren, you're so humorous. I don't come to the temple for no reason. I came here specially for you today for something. No, I should say that I'm not looking for you, but for Shiji Ziyuan. Li Yundong looked back with a smile and said loudly, Ziyuan, I'm looking for you. As he said this, he was about to walk into the shop. Seeing that he was about to leave, Zhang Lufang quickly reached out to grab him and said anxiously, Hey, don't go. I still have something to say to you. Li Yundong asked curiously, Aren't you looking for Ziyuan? Zhang Lufang giggled and said, Someone asked me to pass a message to her. I'm looking for you for something else. As she said this, she lowered her head, took out a book from her pocket and handed it to Li Yundong. She said with a smile, Come on, give me your autograph. Li Yundong looked at her, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Aren't you afraid that your master will find out and accuse you of colluding with the enemy? Zhang Lufang snorted and tilted her head. Her two pigtails bounced playfully. I'm not afraid. It's not like he doesn't know. Besides, his own disciple is useless. Who can he blame? It was the first time that Li Yundong had heard someone talk about him and his master like this. He couldn't help laughing, took Zhang Liufang's book and said, "Then I'll really write it." Zhang Lufang handed over a pen with a smile and said, "Hurry up. I'm not afraid." "What are you afraid of?" Li Yundong shook his head, took the pen and signed two extremely ugly characters. He said helplessly, "If you don't think it's ugly, keep it. If you think it's ugly, go back and burn it." Zhang Lufang glanced at it and also widened her eyes. She raised her head and looked at Li Yundong, as if she couldn't believe that the great Jinren in front of her, who had cultivated to the perfect jade body, could have such ugly handwriting. The corner of Zhang Liufang's eyes twitched, and she subconsciously wanted to burst into laughter, but she quickly held it back. She turned over a page and said with a dry smile, "Sign 2 more." Li Yundong pretended not to see her strange expression and asked, "2 more? Do you think I'm not embarrassed enough? Are you going back to do wholesale?" Zhang Lufang held back her laughter and said, "I showed it to my 2 junior sisters. When they heard that I was coming, they clamored for me to ask you for your autograph." Li Yundong suddenly understood. He scribbled 2 more names on the notebook and handed it over. "Here," he said. "I don't care if your 2 shimmy cry when they see my signature later." Zhang Lufang couldn't help but burst into laughter. "No, they said that they all know you and are your classmates." This sentence was a slip of the tongue. Li Yundong was stunned when he heard it and subconsciously asked, "My classmates? Your junior sisters?" Only then did Zhang Lufang come to her senses. Oh damn it! How could he tell others about Deng Yu and Deng Jiao? They were the 2 sword souls of the Sanju formation. What would happen if they became friends with Li Yundong face to face? Won't I be scolded to death by eldest uncle and Shiji? Zhang Lufang smiled at Li Yundong dryly. She didn't dare to look at him, let alone reply to him. She just turned her head and shouted at Ziyuan, who was walking out of the tea house. She was afraid that Ziyuan couldn't hear her, so she inevitably had to shout one more word. But if she shouted one more word, she would stay a little longer. If she stayed a little longer, she was afraid that Li Yundong would ask her about the rest of her things. Zhang Lufang made a trumpet shape with her hands beside her mouth and shouted, "Shiji Ziyuan, Shishu Wang Yuanshan asked me to give you a message. He wants to see you." After that, she turned around and ran away like a thief. After running out of Li Yundong's sight with great difficulty, Zhang Lufang turned a corner and hid in a corner. Then she patted her chest and said with a look of relief, "I'm smart enough to run fast. My mouth is tight enough." But she didn't expect that she was known as the Big Mouth in Jingyi school. If she knew anything, the whole school would know. When she shouted, it didn't sound strange to others, but to Yen Fang, who was sitting in the tea house, it was like a clap of thunder had exploded in her ears. Yen Fang had been hiding in the Fox Zen school for 9 years without showing any signs. Even with her mental fortitude, she couldn't help but tremble at this time. Her body was shaking uncontrollably, and her heart was in turmoil as if a storm had been set off. What? Shiji, he is still alive. Chapter 793. Zhang Lufang, the loudspeaker, had no idea that she had caused a huge disaster, but she complacently took Li Yundong's ugly signature back to the mountain to report. When Ziyuan heard Zhang Liufang's voice, she was stunned at the door of Desangxian, and her expression became extremely complicated. She couldn't help but look at Li Yundong, only to see that he was looking at her gently, as if he knew what she was hesitating about. Li Yundong said softly, "Go, you should have gone a long time ago." Ziyuan bit her lip gently. After she got the news that her master, Wang Yuanshan, was still alive, she didn't rush back immediately. First, she felt a little bitter and resentful in her heart. Why did he leave her and Hong Ling behind? In the past 10 years she had been alone with Hong Ling, who was lonely. On the one hand she had to take care of the declining sect, on the other hand she had to raise the young Hong Ling, and at the same time she had to cultivate by herself. She was so young, but she had to shoulder such a heavy burden. Who could understand her hardships? Secondly, she also guessed that there must be a secret behind her master's fake death. Although he was forced to show up now, if she rashly went to find him, she might ruin his plans. At that time, she had a strong urge to question her master. Since he had been in Mount Longhu, why did he watch her live such a hard life and be bullied like this? Why didn't he help her? Moreover, if she went to find him immediately when she heard the news about her master, what would Li Yundong think? This thought had been faintly entangled in Ziyuan's heart for a long time. Even she didn't realize that this was the main reason why she hadn't gone to find Wang Yuanshan. But now that she heard Li Yundong's words, Ziyuan's heart suddenly warmed and she felt relieved. At the same time she was deeply moved. The two of them looked at each other as if everything was silent. Ziyuan looked at Li Yundong gratefully and nodded slightly. Well, I'll be back soon. Li Yundong also nodded slightly and smiled. Well, don't worry. Be careful. The two of them were talking like ordinary friends, but behind every word, there was a sincere feeling that neither of them was willing to admit publicly. Ziyuan wanted to tell Li Yundong, I'm not leaving forever, to make him feel at ease. And Li Yundong also understood her thoughts very well. He wanted to tell her, but it doesn't matter. I don't mind. Only the two of them could understand what they were thinking. At this time Ruan Hongling also rushed to Ziyuan's side, grabbed her arm with both hands and said angrily, Shiji, don't go. Now that I thought of looking for you, where did you go before? Ruan Hongling was a stubborn person. Previously she was the one who missed her master the most, but now that she heard that her master was still alive, she was also the one who was the most angry and couldn't bear it. Ziyuan smiled and reached out to tidy the hair around Ruan Hongling's ear. She said softly, don't be silly. No matter what, he is our master. A teacher for a day, a father for life. You're being disrespectful. There were tears in Ruan Hongling's eyes. She stubbornly turned her head to the side and said, then you go. I won't go. Ziyuan shook her head helplessly and said with a smile, Master knows that you won't go, so he didn't ask you to go. When Ruan Hongling heard that, she became even angrier. She stomped her feet and said, annoying, annoying. He has always looked down on me in his heart. As she said this, she covered her face and cried as she left. The people in the tea house saw that the joyful atmosphere had turned into such a depressing one in the blink of an eye. For a moment they looked at each other and didn't dare to speak. Seeing that she was leaving, Li Yundong hurriedly shouted, Hey Hongling, where are you going? Don't run around. Zhou Qin immediately said, I'll go after her. Li Yundong nodded and said, okay. Ziyuan sighed softly and said, it's okay. She's just throwing a tantrum. She'll be fine in a few days. I'll go back to Mount Longhu now and come back tonight at the latest. Li Yundong thought for a moment and looked like he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Su Chan, who had been looking at the two of them, suddenly said, Yundong, go with Sister Ziyuan. Her words were so sudden that both Ziyuan and Li Yundong were stunned. Ziyuan quickly said, no, I can go by myself. However, Su Chan shook her head and said, Jingyi school has done a lot of two-faced things. I'm afraid that after you go, you will be detained by them and won't be able to come back. Have you forgotten how Wang Yuanshan was caught? Ziyuan was suddenly terrified. She couldn't help looking at Li Yundong, only to see that he was also looking at her. The two of them looked at each other. It wasn't that Li Yundong hadn't thought of this before, but he was afraid that Su Chan would be jealous, so he was too embarrassed to say it. But now that Su Chan had taken the initiative to bring it up, Li Yundong was both moved and emotional. He reached out his hand and rubbed the little girl's hair dotingly. He said with a smile, I didn't expect that the little girl who causes trouble all day long will also know how to think. You've grown up. Su Chan stuck out her bright red and tender tongue and said, no, isn't this what I should do? Sister Ziyuan usually takes good care of me. Li Yundong smiled and no longer stood on ceremony with Su Chan. He nodded to Ziyuan and said, let's go. There's no time to lose. Let's go now. After that, he turned around and nodded to Feng Na and the others, then left in a hurry with Ziyuan. Feng Na and Qing Qing watched him come and go in a hurry. They couldn't help but sigh and say, alas, it's really hard to see the dragon's tail. He just said hello and disappeared in the blink of an eye. I don't know what he's busy with all day long. Qing Qing blinked her eyes and said, hey, what do you think they were talking about before? They made it seem like they were filming a TV series. What were they doing? What do they mean by real people? Feng Na shook her head and said, don't think about it. It's useless to think about these things. When Li Yundong wants us to know one day, he will naturally tell us. If he doesn't want us to know, it may not be a good thing for you to know. Qing Qing's face was filled with awe. She gave him a thumbs up and said, you're good. You're a qualified mistress. You have to carry forward this kind of style of not caring about anything and only gambling on tomorrow with your youth. Feng Na was so angry that she laughed. She stretched out her hand to pinch Qing Qing under the table. She gritted her teeth and scolded, will you die if you don't speak? Be careful that I go back and tear your mouth apart. Qing Qing had naturally experienced the power of Feng Na's 9 white bone claws. She quickly raised her hands and said with a smile, No, no, I admit defeat, okay? There are people watching. Save me some face. As she said this, she glanced to the side and was suddenly stunned. She asked curiously, hey, where's Yen Hua? At this time, Feng Na also looked up and saw that the seat where Yen Huach had been sitting had disappeared. Feng Na also said curiously, strange, wasn't he there just now? Why did he disappear in a blink of an eye? But they didn't take it to heart, and in the blink of an eye, they forgot about it. After Li Yundong and Zi Yuan found an empty corner, they flew together toward Mount Longhu. After flying for a short while, they landed at the foot of Mount Longhu. Zi Yuan came to the foot of the side peak where the Lingong sect was located. But when she was about to go up the mountain, Li Yunyang stopped her and said, when you get here you can go up alone. If there is any movement I will be there as soon as possible. Zi Yuan's current strength was no less than that of Wang Yuanshan 10 years ago. It was absolutely impossible to catch her without making a sound. Once someone wanted to deal with her, there would definitely be a lot of movement. With Li Yundong's current realm, he could reach the top of the mountain in an instant. If he wanted to save her, he could do it in the blink of an eye. If he followed her up, he might become a laughing stock. It was better to just stay at the foot of the mountain. Zi Yuan understood what Li Yundong was thinking, so she nodded and slowly walked up the mountain. She had lived on this mountain for more than 10 years. She couldn't be more familiar with every tree and every blade of grass. She looked around at the scene that could be drawn with her eyes closed. But at this time, when she looked at it again, she suddenly felt a strange feeling, but the scenery had not changed at all. Zi Yuan couldn't help but think of the time when Hong Ling had come to find her in tears. She had gone down the mountain with her on a night when the moon was bright and the stars were sparse. From then on, her life had changed. Zi Yuan thought about her cultivation in the past 10 years, and then thought about everything that had happened after she had gone down the mountain. Suddenly, she felt that in just a few months, more things had happened than she had done in the past 10 years of hard work. Zi Yuan sighed softly, but suddenly, a very magnetic voice came from behind her. Zi Yuan, why are you sighing? Hearing this voice, Zi Yuan's body trembled. Only then did she realize that she had been thinking about something along the way. In a daze, she had already reached the top of the mountain. At this time, a green pine tree in front of her was like a big canopy umbrella, shrouding her head in lush greenery. An handsome and elegant man was standing in front of a huge rock. One of his hands was behind his back, and the other hand was gently pressed in front of the rock. He was smiling at her. Master, Master. Zi Yuan's voice trembled slightly, but she quickly knelt down, bowed deeply and kowtowed. Disciple Zi Yuan greets Master. Wang Yuanshan had a faint smile on his face, but his eyes looked at Zi Yuan meaningfully. He slowly asked, get up? Don't be polite with your words, but you're cursing me in your heart. That girl Hong Ling must hate me very much, right? Zi Yuan's body trembled and she bowed even lower. I don't dare. Hong Ling also misses you very much. Wang Yuanshan stared at Zi Yuan for a long time before he shook his head and said, you don't mean what you say. Hey, get up. You know I don't like people who kowtow to me, nor do I like people who follow me around. If you behave like this, then I won't recognize you as my disciple. Only then did Zi Yuan get up. She lowered her head slightly and said softly, Master, why did you ask me to come here? Wang Yuanshan's eyes became more and more strange. He looked at Zi Yuan up and down carefully and asked strangely, aren't you curious why I pretended to be dead at that time? Why did I leave you behind? Zi Yuan smiled bitterly. What else could it be? Isn't it because of Senior Ao Wushuang? Wang Yuanshan sighed softly. Of course there is a reason for her. But there is another reason for her. Don't you want to know? Zi Yuan was slightly stunned and raised her head, but soon she lowered it again and shook it gently. I don't want to know. Wang Yuanshan looked at her and shook his head with a wry smile. You're still the same. You say you don't care, but you care very much in your heart. Alas. Well, don't be awkward. I came here today to tell you a few things. Because in a while, you really won't be able to see me anymore. Zi Yuan's heart trembled. She suddenly raised her head and was surprised. Master, what do you mean? Wang Yuanshan smiled slightly. Nothing. 10 years ago I had already died once. Now that I've lived for another 10 years it's already worth it. But before I truly leave I want to tell you something first, lest you resent me in the future. At this time the resentment in Zi Yuan's heart had long disappeared. Her pretty face was pale and she said in a trembling voice, Master, what are you talking about? What do you mean you died 10 years ago? When will you really leave? Wang Yuanshan lovingly looked at his proudest disciple. He lovingly stretched out his hand and gently stroked her hair. He softly said, "Because in about 2 months' time, I will have to say goodbye to all of you. What happened 10 years ago happened too suddenly, and I didn't warn you about many things. As a result, you've been living a hard life for the past 10 years. I feel very sorry for it, so I want to tell you everything clearly today. You can take these words as my last words before I leave. I still owe everyone an update. I should go to Beijing soon to do something. I guess I'll have to make it up when I come back, but I'll try my best to make it up before I go." Chapter 794. Hearing Wang Yuanshan's words, Ziyuan was terrified. She looked at Wang Yuanshan in disbelief and said, "Master, I don't understand what you're saying." What do you mean?" Wang Yuanshan smiled, sighed softly and said, "Silly girl, you're usually so smart. Why are you so stupid at this time? Think about it, why didn't they kill me when they caught me 10 years ago?" Ziyuan's heart tightened. This was also what she couldn't figure out the most these days. Others might not know, but as an internal cultivator of the Jingyi school, she knew very well how the Jingyi school dealt with traitors. No matter how talented Wang Yuanshan was and how highly regarded he was by Master Zhang, he had betrayed the sect, which was a great blow to the Jingyi school. If he was not severely punished, how could he convince the public in the future? Therefore, after Wang Yuanshan had been captured, Ziyuan knew that her master would definitely die. Only by completely eliminating the traitor could people be the greatest deterrent. Otherwise, there would be endless cases of apostasy in the future, and then the sect would be finished. But when Ziyuan heard the news that Wang Yuanshan was not dead, she also secretly thought, "Why didn't Master Zhang kill my master? Is it just because he cherishes talent?" Wang Yuanshan looked at the change in Ziyuan's expression. He chuckled and said, "It's strange, isn't it? But if you had known more than a decade ago that there might be a great calamity in the future, you wouldn't have found it strange." Ziyuan was even more shocked. She quickly realized something and asked tentatively, "Master, are you talking about the mystical silver fox?" Wang Yuanshan nodded slowly. Among the Buddhist sects, Wuhua, the disciple of Master Purin of Shiyuan Temple, is the best in the world. Among the Taoist sects, the most powerful one in spying on the secrets of heaven is Lu Guan, who knows the direction of the world by observing the stars. These two sects predicted more than a decade ago that there would be a great calamity today and that the mystical silver fox would be reborn. Therefore, as early as that time, the cultivation sects of Buddhism and Taoism began to plan to deal with this calamity. As he spoke, Wang Yuanshan walked to the front of the wind-dust stone with his hands behind his back. He looked at the clouds and mist on the opposite top of the mountain and sighed. At that time, all the major sects were trying their best to find and train people who could compete with the mystical silver fox. But after searching, all the major sects were very clear that more than 1,000 years ago, the mystical silver fox almost swept the world with her own strength. Later, only one soul and two souls escaped to Japan, and almost swept Japan again. Hey, such a peerless expert in this Dharma-ending age, it was no different from a fool's dream to find someone who could compete with the mystical silver fox. Unless the living Buddha descends, the wisdom king is reborn, the golden immortal is reborn, or the gods descend to the mortal world. Ziyuan couldn't help but ask, but now the Akalanatha has been reincarnated. Isn't Li Jiandong specialized in dealing with the mystical silver fox? Wang Yuanshan shook his head. Who could have guessed that the immovable wisdom king would reincarnate more than 10 years ago? Wuhua's destiny connection and Lu Guandao's star-gazing can predict the birth of the tribulation, but they can't predict how the tribulation will end. They can guess the beginning, but it's impossible for them to guess the result, let alone the process. Therefore, Zhang Tianshi worked so hard to train me at that time in order to deal with the mystical silver fox. Ziyuan's expression suddenly became a little strange. She asked hesitantly, "But master, since you know why did you and fell in love with Ao Wushuang? Is that what you want to ask?" Wang Yuanshan asked with a smile. Ziyuan bit her lip gently and nodded slightly. Wang Yuanshan chuckled and asked instead of answering, "Do you remember the psalm I once left you?" This psalm had been read by Ziyuan countless times. She could really recite it backwards. At this time, hearing Wang Yuanshan's words, she immediately whispered without hesitation, "I remember. Once the Jindan appears, the mortal fate is set, and the thunder first rings, then the truth can be seen. The spirit mirror is easy to break the mortal tribulation, and the immortal sword can't break the red rope. Yunhai sits and looks at old Yunhai and talks about the wind and dust in front of the stone. Chang'e has no regrets about stealing elixirs. Why should Hongyang envy Zhang Sheng? Wang Yuanshan said with a smile, "At that time, you stood in front of this stone and asked me what this poem meant. I told you that this poem was about the twists and turns and fate of you and your destined lover together. You asked me why I would fall in love with this lover I didn't know in the future. I told you that when the time came, you would naturally fall in love. Do you understand now?" Ziyuan's body suddenly trembled, and a complicated look flashed in her eyes. If this sentence had been said to her before she went down the mountain, she would not have understood it. But now she really couldn't understand it more. When she went down the mountain, she was sure that she would not fall in love with the so-called lover mentioned in her master's psalm. Especially when she saw Li Jiandong for the first time, she was even more sure that he was a greedy and lecherous person who would not amount to anything. But what was the result? After getting along with him day and night, this man had slowly walked into the depths of her heart. She couldn't get rid of this figure even if she wanted to. Presumably, when Master met Ao Wushuang, it was probably like this, right? They got along little by little, walked into each other's lives, and deeply imprinted each other's voice and appearance on their souls. They couldn't forget each other even for a second. As long as they were separated, they could feel that they were entangled by a suffocating pain. Ziyuan sighed softly and asked in a low voice, "But Master, since you predicted that the successor of Jindan would be my lover, why didn't you predict that he would fall in love with other women?" These words were filled with hidden bitterness. Only at this time would the strong Ziyuan reveal her weakness and grievance slightly. Wang Yuanshan smiled, which revealed an open-minded and wise smile that had seen through the vicissitudes of the world. "Silly child, this poem is talking about your life, not his. This is my life." Ziyuan was slightly stunned and murmured these words in a low voice. Her expression was as if she had become infatuated. Looking at Ziyuan's appearance, Wang Yuanshan sighed for her in his heart. What a silly child. She is usually cold and cheerless, as if there is nothing in the world that she would care about, but in fact, deep in her heart, there is a tenacity that she can't bear to give up. Wang Yuanshan looked at Ziyuan fixedly. After a long time he sighed and said, "My meeting with Ao Wushuang was destined. It can be said that it was deliberately arranged by someone. The purpose was for me to break into the Fox Zen School and figure out the direction and plan of the Fox Zen Schools. But I didn't expect that Ao Wushuang and I would fall in love." Ziyuan couldn't help but laugh helplessly. Fate made fools of people. There was nothing more dramatic than this. Wang Yuanshan also shook his head and said with a smile, "It was just a play, but I didn't expect it to become real." At that time, Zhang Tianshi knew that I had betrayed the sect because of Ao Wushuang. He was furious and swore that he would take my head. Later, Brother Kong Yun lured me into the trap, and I was captured by many masters of the Jingyi school with the power of the magic formation. Originally, Zhang Tianshi wanted to kill me to frighten the many disciples of the sect. But Brother Kong Yun begged me, saying that if I died, I was afraid that no one would be able to deal with the disaster 10 years later. So, after Zhang Tianshi and many Sherbo at that time discussed it, they decided to spare my life for the time being, but they said that Ao Wushuang must not be spared. Ziyuan's heart trembled. She knew that if Zhang Tianshi and the others insisted on this opinion, Ao Wushuang would have been dead by now. But why was Ao Wushuang still alive? Seeing her puzzled expression, Wang Yuanshan smiled and continued, "Yes, you must be wondering why Ao Wushuang is still alive. The reason is very simple. It's because I took the initiative to make a deal with them." "What deal?" Ziyuan reacted very quickly. She faintly smelled an ominous aura, which had something to do with Wang Yuanshan saying that she would die soon. Wang Yuanshan said lightly, "Zhang Tianshi and the others promised to let Ao Wushuang go, and I promised to be trapped in the absolute love-extinguishing formation willingly." Ziyuan suddenly took a deep breath. The absolute love-extinguishing formation? This is too cruel, isn't it? Ziyuan naturally knew the power of the absolute love-extinguishing array. It was originally a magic array invented by Buddhist cultivators, but later it was learned by Taoist cultivators and used to deter those cultivators who attempted to marry the alien race. However, although this formation was powerful, as long as human cultivators did not go out of the formation, there would be no danger. Even if a demon wanted to enter the formation, it would only slowly wear down the demon's demon chi and spiritual power, and it would not be able to instantly kill the demon. Besides, The mystical silver fox would not be so stupid as to go into the absolute love-extinguishing formation by herself. Master said that she would die soon. Where did this come from? Could it be? Ziyuan's heart suddenly skipped a beat, and her eyes widened. Suddenly, she whispered in disbelief, Master, do you mean that if the mystical silver fox recovers her power in the future, you will go out to fight her? Wang Yuanshan looked at Ziyuan fixedly, smiled slightly and nodded slowly. You are worth teaching. Ziyuan's body trembled and she couldn't help saying in a hoarse voice, Master, if you go out to fight the mystical silver fox, you will attract the 9-heaven divine night thunder. Wang Yuanshan said slowly, Yes, this is the agreement I reached with Zhang Tianshi and the others. They let Ao Wushuang go and I will die with the mystical silver fox at the cost of my own life. Ziyuan only felt that there was a thunder in her head, buzzing. It was not easy for her to see her master again. How could this be the result? Ziyuan's body was on the verge of collapse. She subconsciously shouted, No, it can't be like this. They are too selfish to do this. It's too much. Wang Yuanshan looked at Ziyuan lovingly, shook his head and said, When the nest is overturned, there will be no intact eggs. If the mystical silver fox really recovers all her power with her character, she will definitely take revenge. At that time the world will be in chaos. It will not only be us cultivators who will suffer, but also those innocent mortals in the secular world. The reason why I promised them was not only to protect Ao Wushuang, but also to protect the people in the world. Therefore, I don't resent them and I hope you don't resent them. They just want to protect the incense in the cultivation world so that it can continue to be passed on. Ziyuan was well educated and reasonable. Naturally, she knew that Wang Yuanshan was right, but no matter how rational she was, she couldn't accept such a thing. She just shook her head hard and tried to hold back the tears in her eyes. Wang Yuanshan gently reached out his hand, stroked her hair and said softly, Well, I've told you the cause and effect of the matter. In addition, the reason why I called you here today is to tell you not to attend the inauguration ceremony of the Linggong sect in the future. This sect has been passed down for more than 1,000 years. If it is destroyed, it is destroyed. There is no banquet in the world that does not come to an end. Don't be confined by these things. Don't be like me. I can't let you follow my old path. After saying that, Wang Yuanshan continued, Also, the treasured scriptures that I left behind, you can do whatever you want with them. I know that if I don't say anything, you definitely won't easily touch them. That's just your personality. Moreover, I left behind the Qingquan Rui mirror. Now I'll tell you where I hid it. Come closer and I'll tell you. At this time, Ziyuan's eyes were misty with tears. She was not in the mood to listen to these things, but her obedience to her master, which she had cultivated over the years, still made her subconsciously move closer. Wang Yuanshan whispered a few words in Ziyuan's ear and then asked, Do you remember? Ziyuan wiped away her tears and nodded. Wang Yuanshan smiled at her and said, That's good. Go down the mountain. Don't let him wait for too long. Ziyuan just shook her head and wiped away her tears. She was concerned about her master's life and death, so how could she be willing to leave? However, Wang Yuanshan gave her a push and pushed her far away. He stood next to the Fengqin stone, looked up at Ziyuan in the distance and said loudly, Ziyuan, go down the mountain. Just pretend that I died 10 years ago so you will feel better. After that, he raised his head and laughed. With a wave of his long sleeves, his body shook and disappeared. Ziyuan went down the mountain along the mountain road like a walking corpse. Along the way, she didn't even know how she got down the mountain until she vaguely saw a very familiar figure standing not far away, looking at her with gentle eyes. Only then did she realize that she had arrived at the foot of the mountain, and he was looking at her in front of her. At this moment, Ziyuan looked at Li Yundong and could no longer control her heart. She threw herself into his arms and burst into tears. Chapter 795. Li Yundong had never seen Ziyuan cry in front of him, let alone cry out loud like this. For a moment he panicked and raised his hands in the air. He didn't know whether to hug this beautiful fairy or press his hands on her shoulders. Li Yundong was at a loss and didn't know what to do. He could only ask repeatedly, What happened? Ziyuan just shook her head and burst into tears. This cry was like the Yellow River bursting its dike and the Yangtze River bursting its mouth. All the emotions that had been accumulated in Ziyuan's heart for many years were released in an instant. Seeing that she was unwilling to say anything, Li Yundong could only reach out and gently put his arm around her shoulder. His other hand gently patted her back, silently accompanying her and not asking any more questions. Ziyuan cried for a long time before she slowly stopped crying. She put her hands on Li Yundong's chest and propped herself up. She wiped her tears and said in a choked voice, "Master, he told me what to do after his death." Li Yundong was shocked. "What? Wang Yuanshan? The best in the world? He told you what to do after his death? What's going on?" After Ziyuan finished venting, she calmed down and gradually controlled her emotions. With red eyes, she told Li Yundong in a low voice what she had said to Wang Yuanshan on the mountain. Li Yundong only listened with his eyes wide open, and his whole person was stunned on the spot. Li Yundong took a deep breath and said, "Buddhism and Taoism began to deal with all this more than 10 years ago? It can't be, can it? This is too exaggerated, isn't it?" When Li Yundong had learned that Yen Fang had sneaked into the Fox Zen school for 9 years just to take revenge, he had been shocked by Yen Fang's patience and perseverance. However, he had soon discovered that Lu Yi had faked his death, and he seemed to have discovered Yen Fang's true identity. Then the mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. But now, Li Yundong had discovered that the cultivators of the older generation of Buddhism and Taoism were the real oriole, the hunter holding the bow and arrow behind its back. Wasn't it too scary to plan for more than 10 years? For a moment, Li Yundong couldn't help but be shocked by such a layout. He was tongue-tied and said, "In that case, why didn't they destroy the Fox Zen school earlier? You're only sending those young cultivators?" Ziyuan shook her head and said, "They're just afraid of alerting the enemy. They besieged Mount Tian long before. Now it seems that it was just a test, but they didn't expect that they would test you out." Li Yundong suddenly thought of something and said in disbelief, "None of the people who participated in the siege of the Fox Zen school knew the real purpose of all this?" Ziyuan sighed softly and said, "They didn't know that they were just pawns. Even I didn't know at that time." "I'm afraid there are no more than 10 people in the cultivation world who know about this." Li Yundong was stunned for a long time before he shook his head and said, "After more than 10 years of planning. Today the real killer move was revealed. It's really scary. Isn't Wang Yuanshan afraid that I'll tell others?" Ziyuan raised her head and fixed her eyes on Li Yundong. She said softly and firmly, "You won't?" Li Yundong really wanted to ask Ziyuan why she was so sure that he wouldn't, but he saw that there seemed to be an extra emotion in her eyes that she didn't usually have. His heart skipped a beat for no reason and he didn't dare to ask again. He coughed dryly and changed the topic, saying, "What is the mirror of heaven and earth that your master mentioned? Why haven't I heard you mention it before? Is it very important? Let's hurry up and get it first." Ziyuan's heart was in a mess. She wanted to save her master, but she knew that Wang Yuanshan was ready to die. Moreover, the current situation was a dead end. No one could solve it. Even if she had the ability to reach the heavens, she was afraid that she would be helpless. And most importantly at present, it seemed that Wang Yuanshan had used herself as the bait to lure the absolute emotion-extinguishing formation. After she came out of the formation, she would use her spiritual power to entangle the mystical silver fox, and then lure the 9 divine night thunder to kill the mystical silver fox. This was indeed the safest way. If she acted rashly, she might even ruin her master's plan. It would be a small matter if she was punished or even died, but if she implicated all the people in the world, it would not be enough to atone for her sins even if she died 100 times. Therefore, Ziyuan did not encourage Li Yundong to find a way to save Wang Yuanshan. She could only watch helplessly as her most respected master approached death day by day, walking step by step towards the abyss, and she could do nothing about it. Ziyuan's heart was unprecedentedly heavy, and she had never been so weak before. The beautiful fairy whispered, "Li Yundong, will you accompany me for a while? Let's walk all the way. I want to talk to you more." Li Yundong also understood Ziyuan's feelings very well. He sighed in his heart, but said with a smile on his face, "Okay, let's walk slowly all the way if it's not far." Ziyuan said in a low voice, "It's not very far. It's near Mount Longhu." Li Yundong nodded. The two of them walked slowly along the rugged mountain road of Mount Longhu, shoulder to shoulder. Just as Ziyuan stumbled down the mountain, Wang Yuanshan had already disappeared in front of the Fengqian stone, but after Ziyuan's figure disappeared on the mountain road, he reappeared in the same place. His eyes were fixed in the direction of Ziyuan's leaving figure, and his expression was complicated. After a long time he let out a long sigh. After that he said slowly, "Come out." "Do you think I don't know you're hiding?" After that, Wang Yuanshan looked sharply in one direction. After a while, he saw a figure slowly coming out of the woods. Wang Yuanshan saw a man standing in front of him. He had delicate skin and a handsome appearance, but his eyebrows were quite feminine. What surprised him most was that the man was staring at him, his eyes full of shock and excitement. Wang Yuanshan was stunned. He didn't understand why the strange man in front of him was so excited to see him. He thought to himself, "Does this guy know me?" Wang Yuanshan looked at the man in front of him with unkind eyes, snorted coldly and said, "Did you have a good time eavesdropping just now, fellow Taoist?" He had always been kind and didn't easily fight with others. He also didn't like people fighting in front of him. Although he knew that someone was eavesdropping in the distance, he didn't expose him. He only waited for Ziyuan to leave before he exposed the man, lest Ziyuan found out and fought with him. But when he said this, the man didn't respond at all. He just looked at him in shock. Wang Yuanshan knew that what he had said to Ziyuan was extremely confidential, but if it had been 10 years ago, if the man in front of him had heard it, he would have definitely killed him. But now the arrow was already on the string, and it was about to be touched. Even if someone knew, it wouldn't affect the overall situation, so he didn't need to kill the man in front of him. He only needed to keep him in captivity for 2 months and then let him go. Seeing that he didn't speak, Wang Yuanshan snorted and said, "Since this fellow Taoist refuses to tell me, don't blame me for being rude." After that, he stepped forward and was about to make a move, but suddenly he heard the man cry uncontrollably, "Senior Shirdi." In Wang Yuanshan's life, there was only one person who called him Shirdi, and that was his shimi, Yanfeng. When he suddenly heard this, his body suddenly shook and he looked at the man in front of him in shock. He said dumbfoundedly, "What did you call me?" This person was Yanfeng. She also knew that not only had her appearance and voice changed greatly, but even her gender had changed. No wonder her Shirdi couldn't recognize her. She took a step forward, and years of grievances and lovesickness gathered together. She couldn't help crying and said, "Shirdi, it's me, I'm Yanfeng." Even though Wang Yuanshan had a calm temperament at this moment, he couldn't help shaking and almost fainting. His shimi used to be a famous beauty in the cultivation world. Her beauty was no less than that of Ziyuan and Ao Wushuang. Unfortunately, her temperament was too arrogant, and she never pretended to be nice to others, so she was not popular. But 10 years later, such a beauty had turned into a man. This was really something that no one in the world could imagine. Wang Yuanshan was dumbfounded and stammered, You are Yanfeng." How is this possible?" As he said this, his face changed and he said sternly, "Who the hell are you? How dare you pretend to be my shimi like this? Do you think I won't kill people just because I have a good temper?" Yanfeng smiled bitterly and said, "Senior brother, I know you definitely won't believe that I'm Yanfeng looking like this, but is there another person in the world who knows about the little things that we get along with each other?" As she said this, she slowly told him about her and Wang Yuanshan's cultivation in the same sect. Even if it was a trivial thing, she was very familiar with it. In the past, she was proud and arrogant, and she didn't take anyone in the world seriously. Even if it was a person like Zhang Tianshizi of the Jingyi school, she would only look at him a little more, but it was impossible for her to praise him more. She was such a proud person, but she only loved Wang Yuanshan and believed that he was her lover. She just liked him silently in her heart and didn't show it on her face or mouth. Wang Yuanshan only regarded her as his sister, and there was no romantic relationship between them. But at this time, when he heard Yanfeng talk about the trivial things in the past, his heart suddenly trembled. He knew that the person in front of him must be Yanfeng, and only she knew so much about him. He also instantly understood his shimi's affection for him. In the world, only those who loved someone deeply could remember every little detail of this person so clearly, just like how he could remember every little detail of his relationship with Ao Wushuang as if it were his own family treasures. Although Wang Yuanshan didn't love Yanfeng, it would be a lie to say that he had no feelings for his shimi. It was just that this kind of feeling did not involve love between a man and a woman. It was just the love between a brother and a sister. He saw that Yanfeng, who had been peerless in the past, had now become a cultivator who looked neither male nor female. He seemed to empathize with her pain. This sentimental man in the world felt as if his heart was being twisted by a knife, and his eyes turned red. He said in a trembling voice, "Shimi, how did you become like this?" When he called her Shimi, Yanfeng couldn't help but burst into tears. She covered her face and began to cry bitterly. Today there was lightning and thunder in Dongwu City. Fellow Taoists, does anyone want to go through the thunder tribulation? What? Don't you know which city Dongwu City is? Well, go to Baidu and search for Shantang to see which city this place is. Chapter 796. Yin Fang was extremely strong-willed and tolerant. If she hadn't seen Wang Yuanshan, who was closest to her, it would have been impossible to see her shed a tear. Wang Yuanshan knew his shimmy very well. He had known her for decades, but this was the first time he had seen her cry. Wang Yuanshan's heart ached when he saw this. He couldn't help but want to comfort her, but Yin Fang immediately took a step back and shouted hoarsely, "Don't come over." Wang Yuanshan immediately stopped and said in pain, "Shimmy, what happened?" Yin Fang had heard everything clearly. She also knew that her Xixiang still loved Ao Wushuang, and that in 2 months her Xixiang would probably die generously. She didn't want to tell Wang Yuanshan that she had lurked in the Fox Zen school for 9 years in an attempt to take revenge, because she knew that if she said this, not only would Wang Yuanshan not appreciate her, but he would also blame her. Wang Yuanshan knew her, but she knew Wang Yuanshan better. Moreover, if she were still a girl at this time, she could tell him everything, but now. Yin Fang felt as if a knife was being twisted in her heart. She cried bitterly and said, "Xixiang, don't ask. Please don't ask." Wang Yuanshan knew that Yin Fang was strong-willed and even a little headstrong. Now that she had become like this, there must be some unspeakable difficulties. He had never seen Yin Fang's nephew, and he didn't know that Yin Fang had occupied his nephew's body. But seeing Yin Fang like this, he felt even more pity for his shimmy. He just sighed heavily and said, Okay, I won't ask, but Shimmy, why did you come to me today?" Yin Fang suddenly raised her head and shouted with tears in her eyes, "Do I have to come to you for something else?" Wang Yuanshan was speechless. He didn't know how to face his infatuated junior sister. He lowered his head and sighed deeply. "Junior sister. I know how you feel about me. However, I believe that you have heard it just now. A calamity is about to come. When the nest is overturned, no eggs will remain intact. You should hide as far as you can. Don't drag him into this." Yin Fang wiped away her tears and gave a sad smile. She looked at Wang Yuanshan with a complicated look in her eyes and said slowly, "Senior brother, I have become neither a man nor a woman. Although my cultivation has progressed by leaps and bounds, my heart is filled with remorse and hatred. I really want to be a woman again. But I know senior brother has a magic treasure that can help me realize this wish." Wang Yuanshan blurted out, "Will of Universe Mirror?" Yin Fang nodded slowly. "That's right. Senior brother, are you willing to give this magic treasure to me?" Wang Yuanshan suddenly looked embarrassed. "But I've already promised to give it to Ziyuan." Yin Fang knew that Wang Yuanshan had another secret magic treasure in addition to the Bahuang and Liuha sword, the sky-reaching glazed mirror, and the purple-gold Luo jade plate. Wang Yuanshan had only occasionally mentioned this magic treasure to them, but they had never seen him use it. This magic treasure was extremely important, so important that Wang Yuanshan thought that all the magic treasures of the Linggong sect together were not as important as the Heaven and Earth Rui mirror. Therefore he had deliberately hidden this magic treasure and only told his disciple and Shimmy the location of the treasure. No one else even knew about the existence of the Heaven and Earth Rui mirror. When Wang Yuanshan had betrayed the sect, he had been quickly wiped out by the Jingyi school. All of this had happened so suddenly that Wang Yuanshan hadn't had time to tell Ziyuan and Yin Fang that he had moved the Heaven and Earth Rui mirror before he had been arrested. Not only Ziyuan, but Yin Fang had also searched for this magic treasure many times, but to no avail. Now all of Yin Fang's hopes were pinned on this magic treasure. She knew that if the Heaven and Earth Rui mirror fell into Ziyuan's hands, it would definitely be her nightmare. She would never be able to surpass Li Yunyang in her life. Yin Fang couldn't help but say loudly, "I am your Shimmy and her Shirshu. You would rather give it to her than to me? Besides, as long as I recover my female body, I will immediately return it to her. Don't you believe me? Do you want me to swear to God?" Wang Yuanshan knew that although Yin Fang had a strong personality, she was also a person who kept her promises. She had a heroic character and would definitely do what she had promised, no matter how difficult and dangerous it was. He thought for a moment and sighed. "Well, I'll tell you. But you'd better make it clear to Ziyuan. Don't have any grudges between you and your nephew because of such a thing." Uncle and nephew? Yin Fang couldn't help but look at her male body. She couldn't help laughing strangely, and tears slowly flowed down her cheeks. "Now we're really uncle and nephew. The seniority in the cultivation world originated from the tradition of favoring men over women in ancient times. Although she was a woman, she still called her Shirshu or Shirbua instead of Shirgu or Shirsun. Yan Fang's words were full of pain, and Wang Yuanshan sighed when he heard them. But he didn't know that Yan Fang's temperament had changed greatly in the past 10 years. In order to get revenge, not only had her personality changed, but even her appearance and gender had changed. But the only thing that hadn't changed was her love for Wang Yuanshan. It was just that she was now a man, so she didn't dare to tell Wang Yuanshan about her feelings. She just wanted to obtain the Cosmos Rui mirror, take revenge and regain her womanhood. Wang Yuanshan hesitated for a long time. In the end, his feelings for his shimmy overcame his worries. He also believed that his shimmy would keep her promise, so he told Yan Fang the location of the treasure. When Yan Fang heard Wang Yuanshan tell her the location of the mirror of heaven and earth, she was ecstatic and immediately wanted to fly to the treasure. But she moved. After taking 2 steps, she couldn't help but turn around and look at Wang Yuanshan in a daze. She knew that once she left, it was very likely that she would never see her Shirdi again. She couldn't help but ask, Shirdij, did you ever like that woman named Yan Fang? Yan Fang was now beyond recognition. Seeing that her Shirdi was still handsome and elegant, she couldn't help but feel inferior and didn't even dare to ask directly. Wang Yuanshan naturally knew Yan Fang's pain. For a moment, his eyes were blurred as if he remembered the time when he and his shimmy had just met 10 years ago. At that time he was a handsome young man and she was a budding beauty. The two of them cultivated day and night. Although they did not officially become Taoist companions, they were extremely close. It was really like the saying, the first time a concubine covers her forehead, the first time a flower is folded in front of the door. My husband rides a bamboo horse and goes around the bed to play with the green plums. They lived together for a long time and there is no grudge between them. Although Wang Yuanshan was a great cultivator who had long seen through the world of mortals and was only one step away from ascending, even immortals had their own fetters. How could the feelings of the mortal world be forgotten just because one said so? Wang Yuanshan recalled the past and was stunned for a moment. He whispered in a daze, 10 years of romance, 10 years of dreams, one happiness is all for nothing. Forget all this shimmy. Yan Fang listened to Wang Yuanshan's words and repeated in a low voice, 10 years of romance, 10 years of dreams, one happiness is all for nothing. The more she whispered, the more her heart ached. She couldn't help but burst into tears. In the end, she covered her face and ran down the mountain. Yan Fang cried all the way and ran all the way. She covered her face with her hands and couldn't see the road. She didn't know how many times she fell along the way, but she quickly got up and continued to move forward. She cried all the way and ran all the way to the location of the treasure. Yan Fang knew that even if she was heartbroken, she had to get the mirror of heaven and earth. As long as she had this powerful magical weapon in hand, there was still hope for everything. Li Yunyang and Ziyuan had already set off. She had to get the mirror of heaven and earth before them. Mount Longhu covered an area of more than 200 square kilometers and had 99 peaks. If Wang Yuanshan didn't tell her which peak it was hidden on, she might not be able to find this palm-sized mirror even if she searched for it for a lifetime. What's more, with Wang Yuanshan's cultivation, if he wanted to hide something, he could easily hide it under the ground. Even if others dug 3 feet into the ground, they would never be able to find it. Yan Fang had looked for this powerful magical weapon several times before. She had almost turned this side peak upside down, but Wang Yuanshan had hidden it on an extremely inconspicuous side peak. This side peak had no name. It was neither high nor short among the 99 peaks. Yan Fang followed Wang Yuanshan's guidance and went all the way up the east side of the mountain road. She came to a steep rock face. She flew to the middle of the rocky mountain and took a closer look. Sure enough, she saw a mountainside jungle covered by vegetation as Wang Yuanshan had said. She flew over and pushed aside the branches and grass to take a look, only to see a small cave in front of her. The cave was located on a steep slope of a cliff. It was almost impossible for a human to climb it. Only cultivators could fly up and take a closer look. Moreover, the outside of the cave was covered with dense branches and leaves. If she didn't point it out specifically, she wouldn't be able to see anything unusual even if she flew close. Yan Fang flew in and felt that the cave was so narrow that it could only accommodate one person walking side by side. If she wanted to go inside, she had to bend down and lower her head. Yan Fang cast a spell and walked inside with a ball of flame in her palm. After walking for about 10 meters, she saw an inconspicuous stone spit out from the moss-covered rock wall. The stone looked like a person's nose. Although it had a strange shape, it did not attract any attention in this cave full of strange rocks. At this time, Yin Fang squatted down in front of the stone and quickly dug the hard stone ground with her hands. If she hadn't cultivated to the Yangshan phase at this time, the hard stone surface would have been difficult for her. She couldn't dig the hard stone ground at all. Yin Fang gritted her teeth and dug the ground with her bare hands. After digging down about half a meter, she saw a beautifully carved, palm-sized round mirror lying quietly in the pit. Although the mirror was covered with dust, Yin Fang could still feel an inexplicable power lingering around the powerful magical weapon, which was faintly discernible. Yin Fang was shocked. She quickly picked up the mirror, and then carefully touched the pit with her hands. After confirming that there was nothing, she ran out of the cave. She knew that Ziyuan and Li Yunyang were also rushing here. It was really a blessing for her to get the mirror of heaven and earth before they did. Yin Fang did not dare to stop. She took the mirror of heaven and earth and flew far away before she dared to stop. Carefully looking at the magic treasure in her bosom, her body trembled violently. She was so happy that she could not restrain herself. She could not help but raise her head and laugh out loud. This laughter was full of bitterness and sorrow, but also joy and excitement. She knew that her misfortune had finally turned for the better, and her luck had finally turned for the better. With the mirror of heaven and earth, the #1 powerful magical weapon in the cultivation world, it would not be a dream for her to break through the Jinshin, cross the Thunder Retribution, and even reach the Golden Immortal level in the future. Yin Fang reached out to press the surface of the mirror and poured her Jinshi into it with trembling hands, trying to make the powerful magical weapon recognize her as its master. However, Yin Fang was shocked to find that no matter how much Jinshi she injected, the mirror of heaven and earth did not move or react at all, as if it was just the most ordinary mirror. This is impossible. Yin Fang couldn't help widening her eyes. She shouted hoarsely, "How could it not recognize me as its master?" Yin Fang couldn't help but try again, but she could feel that there was a great power hidden in the mirror. However, this power was separated by an inexplicable thing. She could feel it but she couldn't touch it. It seemed that there was an insurmountable moat between the powerful magical weapon and her. Yin Fang suddenly remembered that she had once asked her senior brother, why didn't he use the mirror of heaven and earth? What was his answer at that time? By the way, he had sighed and said, "I'm not the destined person for this mirror, so I can't use it." Could it be? Am I not the destined person? In an instant, Yin Fang's heart was empty and extremely lost. She had finally gotten the mirror of heaven and earth after so much effort. She had thought that she could save everything. Unexpectedly, as Wang Yuanshan had said before they parted, it was really 10 years of romantic dreams, 10 years of happiness for nothing. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.